Disc 7.
24. Thomas and Rosa watch Staffe tramp across the building site towards the 2-storey porter cabin that is Aldersworth Country Town's site office. "You married?" says Thomas, drawing his thumb across his pencil moustache. Rosa draws heavily on her cigarette as she leans against the cab. "No," she laughs. "He's getting married, but not to me." She looks away to a gaggle of workers dragging speedily on shared cigarettes, kicking their boots. "I'm not the marrying kind." Rosa takes out her Bensons, walks up to the bricklayers waiting for a fresh mix. It will be nice to use the bits and bobs of foreign tongue she has picked up down the years. Clay and gravel cloy to Staffe's shoes, and he kicks off the mud against the enormous wheels of a dumper truck. A group of labourers make their way out of the office, keen to get back to work in a hurry. They talk earnestly to each other in what could be Polish or Russian. He watches them go and looks around the site. Everywhere, trucks and men are on the move, delivering materials or taking away waste, laying blockwork or kneeling bolt upright on sloping roofs and throwing tiles. Staffe taps on the door. "Fuck off!" is the reply. He pushes the door and steps in. The place is oppressively warm and foggy with farts and butane gas. Behind a draftsman's desk, strewn with charts and plans, sits a fat man. "Police," says Staffe, showing his card. "Who are you?" "Small," says the fat man. "Lawrence Small. It's a piss take, isn't it?" He laughs. He reaches across the desk with all his might, as if taking a circuitous swimming stroke, picking a business card from a pile and holding it out for Staffe to take. It leaves Lawrence Small breathless. "You're the project manager." Small nods and smiles, seemingly relaxed that CID have sent an inspector to see him, almost as though he was expected. Staffe says, "This is one hell of a site. How many men you got here?" "It depends. 400 at the moment, but soon we'll be swamping the place with sparks and chippies." "You're lucky. Seems like the roofs are on just in time for winter." "That's not luck. It's my job," says Small, as proud as Punch. It is almost as if he had said, "Look at my beautiful wife." "You using local boys for the electrics and woodwork?" Small looks at Staffe suspiciously. "Gas work, we have to. They're all Corgi registered. This is a tight site, Inspector, but I can say that I have no problems with my foreign casuals. They're on site at 7:30 and work through till 6. Just half an hour for lunch, and they work like stink." "You get long days out of them." "They get all the breaks specified by law, and they're all legal." Small reaches around his stomach to open a drawer. He slaps a pile of documents onto the desk. Staffe flicks through the papers. The odd one or two are Polish, and some are Ukrainian. Most seem to be Russian, on special 90-day permits, due to expire in 2 weeks or so. "Good thing for you they work like stink. These permits are about to expire." "We'll get them extended if we need to. All our men have enough points, don't you worry." "I'd have thought it's a pain in the arse, dealing with immigration." "Our sponsors are very good. The men are given all the help we can." And Small stops himself. "I suppose your directors are pretty well connected," laughs Staffe. "We never see them." "Here's that local fellow, isn't it? What's his name?" "You haven't said why you're here, Inspector." "Leonard, somebody?" "I don't know any Leonard." "And that Turkish chap, Makari, that's him. Makari. "I've got a meeting to go to," says Small, pushing himself away from the desk with all his might, the casters on the chair squeaking and groaning. "You must have good Russian connections for the permits. You mentioned your sponsors." "I mentioned that I have to go," says Small, gathering papers together hurriedly, randomly. "How many units are on site, you say?" "I didn't." Small tosses a sales brochure to Staffe. "Hot off the press." He pushes past Staffe, but Staffe takes hold of the big man's arm. Small is sweating now, smells of burnt onions. "What's the build period on a development like this?" 60 weeks. "Impressive," says Staffe, standing, happy to have learned as much from Small's evasions as what the project manager had volunteered, but with a final shot across the bows. "Do you work for Vasily Chankov, Lawrence?" Small's eyes flicker, and his chin fails him. "I have to go." "Does he get the men for you?" "They just arrive. If anything goes wrong—" Small quite unnecessarily looks behind him. "I can call him. Look, I have a family. You know what it's like in construction right now." "I need to know who the workers' sponsors are." "I can't tell you that." "The site is legal, right?" Small nods, now sweating violently. "Then you have nothing to fear, surely." "What has he done?" "What kind of a gun does he have to your head, Lawrence?" Staffe knows he will achieve nothing more here, but he has what he came for. Lawrence shakes his head, looks as if he is standing at a stake, dry as tinder. "You'd best forget I was here," says Staffe, leaving the hot fog, feeling the chill like a welcome breeze. "For both our sakes, you'd better keep this visit to yourself." Back at the car, Rosa tells him the men say they're on 200 quid a week for a 6-day week, but they get another 100 a week sent straight home. Staffe does the maths, which isn't rocket science. Given that he'd have to pay local builders at least 100 quid a day, Small is saving at least £300 a week per man. For 60 weeks, that's £18,000 a man. Minimum. 400 men, that's over 7 million quid that the developers are making, over and above, courtesy of the licences. "Did you ask them how they get their licences?" "I did." "And?" "They clammed up." They park up in Saltborough's Georgian Square, and in this snow-petal dark it looks unchanged. You expect to see ladies in hooped corseted dresses and men in frock coats walking into the Signet. The elder says, "I might stay the night. What I save on diesel will pay for a B&B and some fish and chips." Through the front doors of the hotel, the Christmas lights pulse on and off, winking that St. Nick is close. Somewhere, beyond, the sea comes and goes in the dusk. The sweet smell of hops drifts from the brewery. The detective looks at him, long, as if appraising, says, "Which regiment were you in, Thomas?" What?" The cabby seems shocked, wary. "Your shoes. They're so spick and span you must have been in the army." "Ah," says Thomas, mustering a smile. "I'll give you a ring in the morning, Thomas, when we're ready to go back." The elder watches the two of them go into the hotel. He thinks that they would make a good couple, that he wouldn't mind being in the inspector's shoes tonight. And he also thinks he will need his wits about him. Thinks also about the regiment, and the troubles, how he met the younger. He was trapped in his car on his way back to barracks from seeing a girl. That was bad enough, but there was a new roadblock, and he was forced into an unfamiliar part of town, alone in his car. There were 4 of them, IRA, and he didn't even see the gun, didn't hear the shot, just the windscreen smashing. His shoulder flicked out of its socket away from him. They dragged him out of the car. All he remembers is the silence, the utter silence, no sirens or screams, just the blood spewing down his arm and chest, and them raising their guns, and the younger rushing forward, standing over him with his arms out to the other 3 and shouting, "No! Leave him, I know him!" "That means he knows you, you daft fuck," one of them said. "I'll take my chances," the younger said. The elder had nodded at the young man, recognising him from years before, when he had pulled his squatters off the 15-year-old. They were kicking his head in, stamping on his knees. A year after he was saved, when the elder could no longer take being passed over for bum-fluffed pansies, and when he went into unseen security, he gave the younger a call. He was there when he took his first man down, the army way. Off and on, they've been together ever since. "I don't understand why we had to take this room," says Rosa, looking for an ensuite, disappointed. "This is where Macari brought Elena. It's where Howard stayed," says Staffe, looking out to sea. "It's a double bed, for God's sake, Will." "I'll take the sofa." "What will Sylvie think?" Staffe looks at Rosa with unfettered bewilderment. "You have a good one there, Will. You keep hold of her." "Don't worry, I will." "Well, she looks to me like she can't take much more messing about." "You've been together before. Why'd you split up last time?" "She was in therapy, and I suppose I didn't fully understand." "Therapy?" "Her mother left her and her dad. Went to some hippie commune. She lives in France now." "She's over it now, though?" Staffe shakes his head. "She's convinced she's like her mother. Once, when we split up, she said she was from the same pod." "And is she?" "She's just like her dad. But he's in bits the whole time. I suppose it's her defence mechanism. She really can't stand to end up like him, but she can't say that to herself, can she?" Rosa looks at Staffe as if she doesn't know what to say. "Well, I like her, and you'll be an idiot to lose her. If the phone rings, you take it, that's all I'm saying." And with a trill of fate, the phone immediately rings. They each take an involuntary step back, looking at the phone, then at each other. Staffe sits on the bed, picks up, hears it is Pulford. "How did you know I was here?" "At 2 + 2. Pulford sounds agitated. "I take it you haven't seen the news today." "Oh, well, let me guess. A piece on how Arabella Howard has gone missing." "Blair's lawyers are demanding he's released. They're saying she could be the 3rd woman, and this puts him in the clear." "Is Josie getting it in the neck?" "Not as much as Rimmer." "What are they going to do about it?" "The official line is that her disappearance has nothing to do with Dania and Stone, but Absalom's article blows that one out of the water. The girls all knew each other." Staffe thinks about the wider web that entangles Rosa with that triumvirate. "Read it to me." He leans back on the bed, closes his eyes. He can hear the surf outside. Pulford says, "City police have covered up key evidence in the case of the 2 murdered prostitutes, Elena Dania and Rebecca Stone." "Jesus," says Staffe. "He's not exactly holding back." Arabella Howard, the bad girl daughter of top Catholic Leonard Howard, was reported missing 3 days ago. Miss Howard was a friend of both Slade prostitutes and is believed to have been one of the last to speak to each of the deceased. Graham Blears is being held for the murders, even though Miss Howard disappeared after his arrest. City police were unavailable for comment, and banking bigwig Howard was also tight-lipped. Miss Howard leaves a trail of drug-related misdemeanours and is believed to have a liking for the underbelly of London's fleshpots. Prostitutes are outraged that the police might be covering up key evidence relating to the killings of Dania and Stone. Belinda Prestley, spokeswoman for Working Girls, is demanding that DCI Pennington reopen the case. Is that it? Well, there's more on the inside pages, but mainly glamour shots and a few quotes from street girls, trying to whip up a ripper storm. Staffe feels a white blast of clarity. But it goes immediately, the way it came. "Have you got that data from T-Mobile for Arabella's phone?" he asks. "She hasn't made a call or texted for 4 days. What are you doing up there? Do you want me to come up?" "I need you to get round to Bobo's place and ask him about the immigrant workers up here. Find out what you can about where they come from, how they're treated. And ask Bobo why Elena was writing to Howard and Chunkov." "Was she?" "Oh, yes." The phone goes quiet, and Staffe can tell that Pulford isn't exactly relishing the prospect of facing Bobo alone. "And chase up some companies for me. Blue Coat Holdings, Oakvale Developments, and Pinfold Housing. And a Liechtenstein company called Laissez S.A. What am I looking for?" "Anything with a Russian flavour." "Chankov?" "Keep an open mind, Pulford, and see what you can find on something called Castle Holdings." Staffe hangs up and looks out. The moon is just on the wane. "It's beautiful here," he says to Rosa. "You enjoy it. I'm going out for a few hours. Best have your dinner sent up and treat yourself to a bottle of wine." "I'm coming with you," says Rosa. "I'm afraid not." Rosa puts on a coat, a plaid jacket that Staffe had bought for Sylvie. "Do you want to try stopping me?" The bells drill the prison air. All around, but for Graham Blears it is muffled. His mouth is dry and his sinuses are full of dust. The weight of the mats on top of him makes it hard to breathe, but he waits, still as a cocked trigger, for the last of the doors to slam, the last of the keys to turn. The echoing inmate curses, and officer jibes drift away, down the corridors and onto the fire road. Tomorrow is full lockdown, a consequence of short staffing over the festive season, and today the men are doubly boisterous, which aids Graham's cause. He was counted off the wing and onto the gym, was then also counted off the gym, but had sneaked into the storeroom, had buried himself here beneath all the kit. They won't be able to count him back onto the wing, of course. They will check the missing number and check again. They will try and fail to reconcile with all the other units and with the hospital, and the officers will be supremely pissed off, but it will take them 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, before there is a full-scale search. By then, he will be done. He reaches inside his sweatpants, into his boxers, and with finger and thumb he fishes down from between his buttocks the wrapped-up page of Heat magazine. Unwrapping slowly, like past the parcel gone horribly wrong, and nestling in a montage of upskirt flesh and cleavage and big hair, is his homemade knife. He pushes the mats off him and clambers across the kit, presses open the door from the storeroom to the gymnasium. All is calm. A seldom thing in prison, he has soon realised. To be honest, this little slice of time he has served has not been as horrific as he expected. He could do more, no doubt about it, but he chooses not to. His time has come. It is something he need not bear, and after a life of lonesomeness and stifling misery, he knows a better place awaits. Knows, too, that he will find a peace beyond whatever reckoning awaits him. He was not for this life. Useless will be well cared for, he's sure of that, and nobody will mourn him. No misery will ensue. His breathing is tight, and his fingers begin to tremble. He puts one foot in front of the other, walks towards the wall bars. A pale light intrudes through the narrow windows all around the top of the gymnasium, and he regards his knife. Graham had dismantled his safety razors, pressing the blades into the plastic head of the toothbrush on the reverse of the bristles, 1/8 of an inch apart, wide enough to cut an unstitchable wound. He had then burnt the bristles and the bottom of the plastic until the handle melted away. Graham tucks the knife into the waistband of his Y-fronts and reaches up for the bars. Climbs slowly. He wishes there was a full moon, something of significance for a last night like this. As he gets higher, he takes shorter reaches. Just one bar at a time, and when he looks down, he feels a rush. It warms his loins, and he climbs faster, wanting it to be over. Just over. Forever. Not quite at the top. He's happy to stop, satisfied that the height is sufficient to finish him off. The basketball hoop is way down, and the markings of the court are like a hopscotch pavement. He remembers listening in his box room in Marigold Close to children playing hopscotch. In the summer, Mother sent him to bed when it was still light. He wouldn't sleep, though. Not until the last voice faded from the street. He works his way round, tucking his heels into the gap between the bars and the wall and reaching down for the blade. He has to hold on with just one hand, leaning out, so high above the gymnasium floor. Graham feels sick. He takes the blade, and the way he had planned, puts it to his neck, feeling with his index knuckle for the jugular. His bowels go completely slack, and he feels the warmth, can smell himself. This is no way to die. He wants to close his eyes, but also wants to see the ground meet him. He has thought of nothing else these last days. He takes a deep breath, tugs with all his last might from his Adam's apple to his ear. Strangely, he hears the long fists of his flesh, the fine spray of his blood in his eye. It makes him blink, and he realises he is holding on when he should be letting go. He looks across at his hand gripping the bar, sees a wash of blood vivid red all across his sweats, and drops the makeshift knife. He hears its light rattle on the gym floor, then a key at the door. Graham takes a hold of one hand with the other and pulls. Feels the world alter on its axis, and he loses his footing. Hears a scream from below. Sees the walls and floor and the corrugated panels of the ceiling tumble in on themselves. He waits for the air to be fast all around him, for it to be over in no time at all. But instead of the ground meeting him, he hangs upside down. His foot is trapped between the bars and the wall. He thrashes around, trying to free himself, but he can't. And the white-hot, searing pain of what he has done to himself cuts him, long, incessant. The voices grow louder, more desperate, then subside. The life drains from him. Soon the pain is too much. His eyes close, and the last dim light turns black. The darkness is thick, tight, holds her by the throat, it seems. She has a gag around her mouth, and any sounds she can discern are muffled. Her senses are melded into one, and she is dizzied from hunger. For days, Arabella has seen only black, heard little, tasted nothing she can recognize. She thinks she might be swaddled in something like a sleeping bag. They certainly zipped all around her before they carried her, when she seemed to float from indoors to out. Then, after the vibrations of what could have been a car journey, she thought she could smell ozone. Now they've left her again. No more muffled noises, just the lull and return of an imperfect stillness. She remembers feeling this way asleep on the Imogen, and though it is the last thing she needs, she is visited by memories of her mother and father, and how they were once deeply in love. Nobody saw into the darkness of that love, once the doors were closed, only Arabella and Roddy. She begins to cry, and the tears are warm on her cheeks. She feels them soak into the fabric of whatever blinds and hoods her. She is afraid, for what might happen, at everything she has done, and what she thinks she might know. What she would do to be held tight, for a toque or a line. "25. Pulford twitches each time a car rounds the corner and drives towards the niche he has found for himself, opposite Bobo's deck-access tenement. Bobo's flank of the block only has one stairwell, and Pulford can see all comers from here. A car roars past, picking up speed and squealing as it rounds a corner, going deeper into the Warren and further from Bethnal Green's main drag. Pulford takes the deepest of breaths and rubs his hands, ready to go up, but wary of the response he might get. As he takes his first step, a long-base Mitsubishi pickup glides to a silent halt outside the stairwell to Bobo's place, and the doors open and close quickly, pom-pom, pom-pom, like 4 silenced shots. The 4 men are built like boulders and wear tracksuits. 2 of them disappear into the stairwell, and the others wait by the trucks, looking up and down the street. Pulford waits for Bobo to let them in, for the door to open. A glow of light emerges from within. He winds down his window and holds his breath, trying to discern what sounds in the night. He thinks he hears a strangled human cry. The 2 men on the street talk into their chests, and Pulford is torn. Should he intervene or call for backup? He's not officially here, though. His phone vibrates against his chest. It is Josie. "You need to come in, David," she says, clearly upset. "I can't. I'm on surveillance." "You have to," she says. "What's wrong?" "Blears has killed himself. Come now, please." Staffe walks towards the minicab outside the Signet, and Rosa says, "We're not calling Thomas. He'd take us." "Let's leave our friend to his own devices. See what he gets up to." "What do you mean?" says Rosa, wrapping a pashmina around her neck. It is aquamarine and flows like water. Staffe ushers her towards the minicab, says, "This is Gerald." Gerald Holt makes a fuss of opening the door for the lady, saying to Staffe, "The ridings, you say?" He's clearly excited. "You'll have seen some comings and goings up there these last few days," says Staffe. "Roddy and Arabella are back up for Christmas, I take it." "I don't think anybody's home," says Gerald. How can you be sure? Says Staffe. I usually see 'em when they're here. Nobody's supposed to know she's home. I hope I can count on you for your discretion, says Staffe, patting Holt on the shoulder. Gerald clearly thinks it odd, as they approach the ridings on this bitter Eastern night, that Staffe wants to be dropped at the end of the driveway. But Rosa comes in on cue, complaining she feels sick, needs some air. Staffe tells him to call by in, say, an hour, but to stay on the main road. The drive is 100 yards long, and halfway up Staffe stops, listens to the sound of Gerald's taxi peter absolutely to nothing. Soon, another sound replaces it, and Staffe smiles to himself, glad to have got something right, belatedly. But he wonders just how sinister it might be, the percolating diesel of Thomas's London hackney carriage in the Suffolk night. It is plain to see that nobody is home. No cars parked, just a couple of outside lights on, and the 2-story stairwell and landing lit up, presumably on a timer. Poor Howard. Could it be that money got so tight the domestics had been laid off? Or simply not required in these interesting times? He immediately goes round the back of the house, looking for signs of alarms. There are none. The garden is formal, but overgrown, and the bay-lined square around the fountain is thatched with weeds. The lawn, giving on to our ha-ha and the fields beyond, is 1/2 foot high. In the full moon, the house seems Gothic. A modest Jacobean seat with a Victorian addition jutting perpendicular, but somehow timeless, the sum of all the ages. Staffe can see there are blind cellars beneath the main house, and he tries the door to a conservatory, which itself has a door into the main house. It doesn't budge, so he pulls the sleeve of his jacket down over his hand, punches a pane out, and reaches in, unlocks the door. Glass crunches as he works his way round, urging Rosa to be careful, and picking up pots. The house key is under a dead tomato plant. The house smells of centuries. He tries all the doors off the main hallway, soon coming across the entrance to the cellar. Before they get halfway down the worn stone steps, they smell life. "Someone's been down here," says Rosa. "A woman. I can smell her." There are 3 low-ceilinged vaulted cellars, one with a few bottles of wine and lines of empty racks, one with bicycle skeletons, wooden skis and hickory golf clubs. The third has a padlock hanging like chunky jewellery from its handle. On its floor, a blanket, sack, and vestiges of food. "She was here, all right," says Staffe. They make their way through the ground floor by the stairlights, and once they find Howard's study, which has double-aspect shuttered windows to the front and side of the house, Staffe looks around, picturing what a wonderful place this would be, to escape. Staffe hands Rosa a torch. "I'll take the bureau, you go through the desk." "What am I looking for?" "Anything financial, or letters. Just make a pile of whatever seems interesting." In the large middle drawer of the Dutch walnut bureau, Staffe finds a postcard. It feels rough and the edges are uneven. He holds it up to the torch and sees it is a watercolour of a shore, as if painted from the sea. From the palette employed, he immediately recognises the artist. He squints, studying the image of lilacs and pale blues and yellows, and can see a minaret rising from a village in the mountains beyond the shore. "Imogen," he whispers. "What?" says Rosa. Staffe turns the hand-painted postcard over. All it says is, "My darling R, be safe, be extraordinary." The unceasing tide of a mother's love. "This is Imogen too," says Rosa, approaching Staffe. She hands him an invoice from the Warbling Sea Chandlery. It is a bill for £9,700, a second reminder for unpaid repairs to the mast and bilge for a vessel named Imogen II. On top of the pile of papers Rosa has made is a small ream of travel documents from the last 10 years or so. He can see why Leonard keeps them. It is quite a log, and relates the travels of a man for whom the world is not large enough. Nairobi, Auckland, Lima, Vancouver, Buenos Aires, Rangoon, Phnom Penh, Lima again, the last time, and Istanbul. Istanbul once, twice, thrice, all within a year. The year before Imogen died. The year before Taki Makari moved to England. "Stay here. I'm going to look around," says Staffe. He makes his way from room to room, the boards creaking, the doors squeaking. It is a house only used for weeks in the summer, he suspects. As he rises from landing to landing, up into the heights of the house, a sliver of moon is seen here and there. On the second floor, he looks towards Aldersworth, can see the outline of a crane, which makes him sad. The house is as old as the Howards, older than the townhouse in Mayfair, and Lang's, and the Colonial Bankers' Club. Yet you can see the new money from here. He can't imagine Leonard not being ashamed, and can't comprehend what you might do to preserve this, against a tide that comes and comes and comes. He hears a creak on the stairs, turns off his torch and leans flat to the wall. The moon catches a photograph. Ampleforth Levers, 1974. Somewhere there will be Leonard, in this same life, unrecognisable. Another creak, closer this time. He wants to call out for Rosa, but knows he can't give himself away. He holds his breath. He has another stealthy tread, another board betraying its age. He clenches his fist, looking at all those boys in sub-fusk so long before their time. Staffe breathes out, slow, feels his pulse release as he steps out, raising his hands above his head, smelling, in the musty curtain and rug and dusty wood, the scent of Rosa. Her eyes are wide, and he looks beyond her, sees only dark. "Are you alone?" he says, afraid. "Well, there's no one here, is there?" she says. "I was frightened. And I found this. It doesn't seem to fit." She hands Staffe a photograph of an infant boy with a straight nose and dark skin. He is naked and has a serious look on his face, holding a bucket and spade up to whomever is holding the camera. Staffe takes it from Rosa, puts it in his pocket, and holds Rosa's hand, leads her down through the house. Outside, her eyes are large, watery in the bold, silvery light from the moon. "Do you think they killed Arabella?" she says. Staffe shakes his head. "Quite the opposite." 26. Leonard Howard puts down his mobile telephone. He doesn't say thank you to Gerald Holt, nor even goodbye. He blows out his cheeks and sighs. "Is he at the house, Father?" says Roddy, carrying charts from the aft berth, nimble and alert at the prospect of setting sail, instinctively stooping so as not to bang his head on the ceiling of the boat's galley. He appears to be completely at home. "Holt dropped him off 20 minutes ago." "Do you think he'll come?" Leonard ignores his son's question and sits opposite a third man. Younger, lean and dressed head to toe in black, he has a ruddy face with a stitched cut across his head. "I want to see her," says Leonard. "You agreed not to," says the younger. We're not fucking about here. Do you have children? That's no business of yours. You don't need to know anything about me except I'm on your side. Leonard says, I don't suppose you can stop me if I insist on seeing her? The younger shakes his head. I know my place. His face assumes an extra furrow of sadness. She is blindfolded. That's not the point. You should wait, Father, says Roddy. Howard gives him a scolding look, as if he has talked out of turn in company. He says to the younger, Give me your aftershave, whatever you wear. Watch yourself. This could still go wrong, and then we'd all be in the shit, says the younger, handing him a bottle. Howard holds it to his nose. This stinks. It's every man. That's what they say. Howard dabs the scent on his wrists and onto his index finger, applying it to his temples and behind his ears. Its aroma is abrasive, makes him splutter. What's to be gained, says the younger. I am tired of losing people. The younger pulls across a curtain to reveal a sheet of plywood, cut to fit the cross-section of the hull. Within the plywood, a door has been made, and this is padlocked top and bottom. Once this door is opened, another door, the original, leads to the bow berths. Howard takes a deep breath. The smell claws his throat. His daughter has been here just a few hours, but the ingrained stench of days weeps thick. He knows why it has to be this way, knows that undue tenderness will scupper the deception, but even so, a brace of tears break and he is taken aback. For a brief snatch of time he feels liberated, likes himself a little more. He didn't weep when Imogen went, told Arabella not to cry when he said, Your mother is dead. Leonard crouches down and his bones creak. He could reach out and touch her. He wants to pull away the scarf that is wrapped around her head, binding the rags that keep the sounds of this small world from her. He wants to pull away the blindfold and see what her eyes reply when he tells her that he is sorry for everything. He wishes it had been possible simply to love his daughter at all costs and to protect her. Nothing more. Who's there? She says, her voice muffled and hoarse and mostly lost in the gag. She sniffs like an animal and tries to reach out, but her arms are bound and she falls off balance. Instinctively, Howard reaches for her and catches her. He holds her for the longest second and pushes her upright again. Who is it? She says, muffled. He sits back on his haunches, weighing up the pros and cons if he held her. Daddy, she says. And he knows that one lapse has been sufficient. He should have known better, after all his years of doing the right thing. Too late now. Slowly, uncertainly, he pulls himself together, reaches out, pulls off the hood and sees in the gloom the unadulterated relief that flickers when she sees him, then goes off, like a concussion. Gerald Holt is back at the bottom of the Riding's driveway. He has drunk his flask of tea and figures the inspector will want the lift back to town on a night like this. In his position, Gerald must do what is asked of him. The heater is on high, but icy white hexagon flowers have formed on the wing mirrors. He will be glad when his favours are all evened out. But, to console himself, he pulls out the brochure from the glove compartment and treats himself to a peek at the artist impression. the floor plans of his promised land. A tap on the window makes his heart thud, and he throws the Aldersworth country town brochure to the floor. Wagstaff's face is at the window. Where the hell did he come from? He is smiling, and Gerald feels known. He fixes a smile and flicks the door locks off, but the inspector has gone. Gerald looks around but cannot see him, nor the woman. "Hello?" he calls, winding down the window. He checks in the rear view but can see nothing. The wing mirrors are useless because of the frost. He turns on his headlights, but all they reveal is two beams of falling snowflakes. He starts the engine, thinking this will bring them running. Gerald puts his foot to the accelerator, pulsing the revs. He wants to drive away, but knows he has to honour this side of a bargain. The passenger door opens violently. The night howls in with a black sweep. It is Wagstaff, sitting heavily alongside. The back door opens too. The inspector smiles at him, reaches down at his feet, and picks up the brochure. "No," says Gerald. "That's—" The words trap in his throat, and he feels a softness wrap itself around his neck, pulled tight from behind. He raises his hands to ease the pashmina that strangles him. He can't breathe, but as he raises his hands, a terrible pain shoots down his legs and up into his belly. He looks down, sees the inspector has him by the balls. The inspector's hand is large and hard. Gerald wants to weep, wants to close his eyes and this be over. "I need to know," says the inspector, "where Arabella is. You have seen her." The scarf cuts into him. The pain in his gut gets deeper, sharper, and Gerald raises his hands to his neck, tries to ease the pressure, but he is too weak. "The truth cannot hurt you, Gerald, but the law can." A false light appears alongside, in the inspector's lap. He has Gerald's phone. He tries to say, "Don't!" but he can utter it only in his head, which is screaming. He would say anything now, but it is too late. Life is slipping away. He prays. He sees his grandson first, and then his daughter. Finally, he sees his wife, and in the last morsel of his prayer, he begs forgiveness. Everything goes slack, and Gerald feels his head, too heavy to support itself, snap away from him. "Will you tell me everything, Gerald?" says the inspector, releasing him from that grip. "Yes." The syllable burns in his throat, but Gerald thinks there is a God. His prayers are answered. Pulford unclasps from Josie, and her tears tack to his cheek and neck. She doesn't look him in the eye as they release. He could tell her not to blame herself or feel ashamed, but such advice merely suggests the opposite. "Go," she says, "and thank you for coming." "Where's Rimmer?" "With Tara Fleet. Concocting a new theory, I suppose." "You had the evidence, Josie. He confessed. Maybe it was a matter of honour for him." "Honour?" Something Staffe had said. "Do you need a drink?" he asks. Josie shakes her head. "I might go and see him." "Blears? Don't do that." Pulford has heard the gory details from Jombo, of how Blears had stuck himself like a pig, had contrived to kill himself, that his meat not be poisonous for anyone wanting his body in the afterlife. Nobody had ever heard of anything like it, according to the governor of inmate activities. Staffe and Rosa rise above the Alder River in Gerald Holt's cab, then sweep down into the low-lying folds that crumple along the south side of the estuary, to Warblingsea. In the distance, the water tower signals Saltborough. Staffe sees masts, and he winds down the window, slows the car. Don't you love that sound? Rosa leans across, supporting herself by putting her hand on his thigh. The clinking masts are like chimes, distant, on a cusp. What is it? Staffe is sad that for her it is a new sound. It's not just a sound, he says. Just like the ozone, he sniffs the sea air, isn't just a smell. I don't understand you, Will. She looks down at her hand, takes it away. Are we here? I don't think so. Not yet. He raises a finger to his lips, slows further for what he knows must come. The engine is low, and looking behind, he sees the black cab come into view, then back off, keeping its distance. Staffe waits for a blind bend and accelerates, stretching the gap to the cab behind. The road swoops down and round, seemingly below the close sea, as if reeds can hold back an ocean. Staffe drops Holt's car from fourth to second and puts his foot to the floor. Gerald shivers in the passenger seat, quite unsure still what fate might befall him, and the consequences for his daughter. The revs spool into the red. The engine screams blue murder, and Staffe kills the lights, steers violently left down a rutted track, and waits for the sound of the London taxi. It comes louder and louder, roaring past the track, its suspension squealing. Once it is gone, Staffe tells Holt to get out. I'd leave town, quick if I was you, Gerald. Give it till the new year. Staffe reverses back up the track, puts the lights on, illuminating the frozen Gerald, not wanting to move, not wanting his future to come get him. Following the red taillights of Thomas's cab, they catch him, 1/4 of a mile from the harbour. Staffe sees the chandlery up on the left and a line of shacks that sell fish, so he puts the car into neutral, kills the lights again, and they glide, soundless, with nothing but dark in the rear view. He steers the minicab behind an old Nicholson on a stand, pulls Rosa's head down out of sight. Where are we going now? She says. I'm staying here. You drive the car back to town. Stay at the Bull, though. Don't go near the Signet. Here. He hands her a wafer of 20s. Are these the people who killed Elena and Rebecca? Leave the car by the Magnet Cafe on the edge of town, and use a false name. I can do that, she laughs, nervous. They look at each other, locked in a distant moment. A cloud drifts across the moon, and Thomas's lights smudge the night with red, then die. It is silent, save the coming and going of the sea, the masts chiming. He runs across the boatyard, slowing so he can hear beyond his steps and the rush of his own blood. The driver of the taxi, clearly Thomas, makes his way past the jetty which serves the ferry to Saltborough. Staffe curses Thomas's betrayal, but in the same breath gives thanks that his plan has worked. Staffe knew that if they believed or even feared his lie to Roddy about knowing where Arabella was, they would have to follow his every move. All he had to do then was turn the tables on the lie that revealed the truth. Thomas hooks a leg over the chains that bar access to the boats. He steps straight on deck, the second boat from the harbour wall, looking back before he disappears below. The livery of the boat, and the lettering, Imogen 2, is just as Gerald Holt had described. Now he is here. Staff's choices go to vapour in the sea fret, as rock and the hard sea come together. Pulford gets a dagger's look from the curator of the IT suite, who then looks contemptuously at his watch. The sergeant goes back to his screen, scrolling through the company's house database, cross-checking the Aldersworth development companies, Bluecoat, Oakvale and Pinfold. Vasily Chankov isn't listed as director or shareholder. He does the same for Lessay S.A. and the story's the same. He leans back, rubs his eyes, thinks he should have taken Josie home, stayed with her until she found some kind of peace. "Bloody documents," he says, chucking his pen across the room. The curator scuttles across and tells him to shush, even though Pulford is the only reader in the room. He stretches, fetches the pen, wishes he was with Staffe at the sharp end, rather than tracing the Howard's title, all wrapped up in land for centuries, and them more bankers than farmers. Which makes him think maybe it could be about the land and not the companies. Pulford asks the curator to get him into the land charges registry for Saltborough and Aldersworth. Receives a snarl for an answer. "Otherwise we could be here all night," he says, getting the desired response. He soon sees that the consideration for the sale transfer from Leonard Howard to Aldersworth Developments was relatively modest, a mere £750,000. In the company's register, he sees that Landesbank of Hanover have registered a debenture against the assets, including the land, but an interest is also registered in the name of Magellan Holdings, relating to a profit-share agreement. The interest was registered only 6 weeks ago. "Magellan," says Pulford. He checks the company's details, flicks back through his notebook. Magellan Holdings' registered address is Cobalt Street, St Helier. Its company secretary, a Henry Desai. Unremarkable, save that they are exactly the same address and secretary as he had noted for Vaude Bleu. Another hour later, with the curator huffing and puffing, Pulford leans back, throws down his pencil and sighs, satisfied. The parent company of Castle Holdings traces all the way back to St Helier and Henry Desai. At last, Vasily Chankov puts his head above the parapet. "27. Staffe steps gingerly onto the Imogen 2, peers through the narrow windows that look down below decks. He can hear raised whispers, but is unable to discern what is being said. He continues along the rails to the bow. Here he can see the combed and oiled hair of a suited man who seems to be on his knees. His head is bowed, but Staffe knows him. "Howard," he whispers to himself. Unable to see the object of Howard's attentions, he crawls around to starboard, peers down. From this angle, he sees that the gentleman banker's face is pinched with suffering. His hands, white-knuckled, are turned down, as if in prayer. When he presses his face to the glass, Staffe sees the object of Howard's penitence. Wrapped in blankets and bound at the feet, the body is dead still. "Come on," says a voice within, and Staffe recognises the kindly tones of Thomas. "Don't ruin all we have done." From above, Thomas looks as if he would be unable to bring himself to harm a fly. A big man with round shoulders and bald pate, a pencil moustache and twinkling eyes. "This is my time with her," says Howard. Thomas retires as Howard says over and again, "I'm sorry, Bella. I'm sorry, Bella. We'll be fine now. We'll be fine now." As if he's trying to convince himself or some higher order, that this ordinary and beautiful act of a father loving a daughter could be true. Staffe, distracted by the scene below, hears too late that somebody has come above decks. The engine expectorates, and he turns round. In the fullness of the moon, he and Roddy, stooping by the fenders, scrutinise each other. "Are we going somewhere?" says Staffe. He thinks it might be a trick of the moonlight and the dappling sea, but Roddy Howard appears to smile. "Bella is safe," says the young heir. "We have always loved night sailing." "She is safe from whom?" says Staffe. "You don't know." Roddy makes his way below, leaving the fenders out, and calling, "Father, he has come." Staffe follows him down. Leonard Howard is now sitting at the round table in the Imogen II's galley. He stares at his hands, locked in a slowly twisting, constantly ravelling knot. "You have Arabella," says Staffe. Howard raises his head and summons vigour to his eyes. They are bloodshot. "She is safe." "I must talk to her." "You are a guest here, Inspector." "I'm not here as your guest, Mr. Howard, or your lackey. I've come to find out who killed Elena Dania and Rebecca Stone." "You're barking up the wrong tree," says the elder, looking not so kindly now. "And I'm expected to believe you, Thomas, if that's your name. I guess not." Behind the elder, a younger man studies a chart. He is lean and has a ruddy face, a stitched wound across his forehead. Staffe's head floods, and he steps towards the younger. "Where did you get that cut?" He doesn't look up, simply says, "Fuck you." Staffe continues, "Do you like hotels? Do you have something against prostitutes?" The younger doesn't look up still. In his soft Scouse accent he says, "You put her in harm's way." "Who the hell are you?" "You wouldn't understand," says the elder. Staffe considers something of what he doesn't understand. The decades of the Rosary, England's shadowy lineage, the privacy of clubs. He says to Howard, "Why did Elena Dania visit the Colonial Bankers Club? An unusual place for your whore, if you don't mind me saying." "She wasn't my whore." Howard regards Staffe with an unblemished superiority he simply can't help. The elder says, in low, measured tones, "Mr. Howard had nothing to do with any of that. There is irrefutable proof." "He signed her in," says Staffe, "a week before she was murdered." "We have new information. This will ensure Mr. Howard's situation is not misunderstood." Staffe turns back to Howard. "How does a man like you end up in cahoots with someone like Macari? Your father must turn in his grave." "You have no business with my family, Inspector." "You keep strange company. Brothel keepers, immigrant workers. You had a thing for Elena." "Shut up!" shouts Roddy. Staffe feels a tight grip on his arm. He flexes, but the grip tightens. It is the younger, and Staffe twists to face him, but feels himself sag to his knees, unable to resist. Leonard smiles down at Staffe, thin-lipped. Life returned to his eyes. "Roddy will tell you, I'm not much of a father." "Why are you so keen that I don't speak to your daughter, Leonard?" "As you can see, she is secure." She was taken against her will. That's a crime, says Staffe, on his knees, looking up. The younger stoops, hisses at Staffe. You know fuck all. Surely your own daughter wasn't blackmailing you. Howard nods to the younger. Let him go. He needs to understand. He looks directly at Staffe as he is unhanded. Do you believe in right? I believe in evidence. I've just visited your site, Leonard. You have quite a source of cheap labour there, and I'm guessing Vasily Chankov is sorting you out. Guessing? I thought you believed in evidence. I'll get the evidence. But I know by his admission that he knew Elena. Was he putting the squeeze on you, Leonard? It's not a term I would use, but I have had cause to undertake some research into Mr. Chankov. He holds out his hand. You might call it an investigation. The elder passes him a buff folder marked VT, top right. The elder invites Staffe to sit down, which he does, opposite Howard. You will have asked yourself why exactly Rebecca Stone's employer would want Elena Dania dead. Chankov. Believe me, Inspector, had we not removed Arabella when we did, and how we did, she would have been in the gravest danger. And Rosa? Staffe regards the younger with contempt. She was never at risk. What would Chankov have to gain? Says Staffe. Thomas nods towards the buff dossier, and Staffe opens it, reads quickly, his thoughts colliding, bleeding sense as he absorbs the press cuttings and military discharges, charge sheets and witness statements. This is for flavour, Inspector, says the elder. There is more. One charge sheet is dated 4 months before Vasily Chankov's discharge document from the Russian army. It is translated, as are the rest of the papers. The charge was for the rape of a girl, Ludmila Shostovich. The girl was 14 years old, and her mother ran a farm on her own in the Urals, near the camp where Chankov's company had been based. The elder says, wherever he went, Chankov would coerce farmers to take his men on as labourers. The wages were paid straight to him, but Mother Shostovich worked the land herself and had no money for wages. It didn't take Chankov long to find a means of exchange. Ludmila was 13 when it began. Ludmila took it for a year, then hanged herself from the hay winch in the barn. He pulls from his pocket a photograph of a young girl hugging a boy. Whilst the girl is quite indistinctive, the boy is not. He is, indisputably, Bobo Bogdanovich. Elena knew about this? Staffe takes the photograph from the elder. She's not in the photograph. You really don't want to dwell on where she might have been when this was taken? What she was... Chankov would have remembered her. She was young, and there were many. Believe me, Inspector. I don't think I can go down this road. This isn't evidence. He's a powerful man and really quite wealthy, though we have cause to believe he's been called upon to stretch himself of late. Elena knows how to get the last drop from such men. She was blackmailing him. Staffe recalls the privat envelope from Rebecca's trove, the lilac correspondence in Chankov's house. How did you get this information? We knew Miss Dania might bring you to Mr. Howard's door. We had to prepare the truth. This isn't exactly my idea of proof, says Staffe. I don't subscribe to hearsay. Perhaps you should start, says Howard. That man is a bastard of the lowest order. Hearsay, Mr. Howard. How about you and Taki Makari? I'd never put the two of you together, and I dare say you wouldn't either. But I can see Imogen with a foot in each of your worlds. And I know that in your world, under your god, you could never divorce each other, no matter how much you loved or hated each other. I guess Taki and Sema were a real comfort. In the doorway, Arabella appears. Her blankets shed, she stands tall, frail, holding onto the frame of the door. Her fair hair is lank and her eye sockets are dark, hollow. Her pale skin is mottled with dry red blotches, her lips the colour of milk. "It is time you went," says Howard. "Not until I've spoken to Arabella. I can see that if my curiosity was at all aroused by your relationship with Elena, then Arabella's disappearance would throw me off that scent." Arabella squints, trying to recall who Staffe is. The elder stands by her, whispers into her ear, wary in the extreme as to what she might say. "Have you brought Darius?" She says it to nobody in particular. "I want Dari." "I would like you to come with me, Arabella," says Staffe. She shakes her head, says, "I am happy here," as if reading from a cue card. And Staffe knows he has missed that boat. He buttons his jacket all the way. It will be cold up top. He feels the photograph that the elder gave him of Bobo and Elena's sister. He says to the elder, "You were in the army, weren't you? I'll check. Don't waste your time. I don't exist anymore. Is that where you met your scummy friend?" Staffe looks at the younger. "I wouldn't rile him," says the elder. "I've trained him, but he's different from us." "Thank God for small mercies. I take it you won't be needing that lift in the morning?" "I'll manage on my own." On deck, Staffe looks around. The slap of sea on dock in the dark punches through the wind. The long beach he ran along just a few days ago trails away north, like a knife smear of oil paint. He will call on Chankov, try to get to the bottom of what Arabella might have known but was prevented from saying. As he steps over the harbour chains, Staffe looks back. The younger watches him with cool, dead eyes. This is the man from the dunes. Staffe senses that he moves to an alternate beat.
End of Disc 7. Disc 8.
Taki Makari sits at a table by the window and wipes his eyes, looks out to sea. "Elena," he says under his breath. He brought her here occasionally, to the Nelson, down the coast from Saltborough. She liked the lobster but would never finish it, and always took some away in doggy foil. The staff would swarm around her. Afterwards they would take coffee in the lounge, and he would watch her read her book. Always with her book, mouth open, entranced, her eyebrows pinched by the puppetry of story. She loved it here, and she loved Taki too, so he believed. Still, at night, when Sema puts her hand on his stomach and hooks her thigh over his and breathes heavy, Taki can see Elena. In dreams, they are sometimes here. The last time they came, she ate all her lobster, and afterwards they drove straight back up the coast to the Signet. Elena didn't read that night, instead they talked. She asked him why he had never had children. She seemed angry, accused him of having a cold heart. Taki told Elena that she had no business asking such questions, and he and his wife wanted children, but Sema couldn't carry them. It was because of a fall from a horse when she was younger. "So don't talk to me about a cold heart. when my wife cries at night for children she cannot bear. Imagine her tears if she knew I was talking about such things with a whore in a hotel. Waiting now for another woman to come to their place, he feels the full weight of his history. His chest becomes tight. He thinks he misses a beat, two, and on the perimeter of his vision, he feels her. He shoots his cuffs, chin up, turns slowly. A gentleman. Crow's feet pinch the corners of her eyes, but her cheeks are high and wide, her nose straight, and she is absolutely alive. Too much life. Here and there, men subtly turn. She sits beside him, takes his breath clean away. For an instant, an old love issues new. "Hello, Marquis," says Imogen breathily. Despite the years, she is every inch the woman she ever was. "You don't change," he says. "Then you know nothing. How is Arabella?" "Safe, I hear. Do they know you have arrived?" "It's been 5 years. I think we can all wait another day. I need to be ready for it." She takes a lusty swallow of Makari's wine. "And how is Roddy?" "The same. He's a quiet one." "I miss him so," she says, wanting to say more, but deciding against. Makari calls the waiter over, and, as if it is a proclamation, Imogen requests a glass and another bottle, orders lemon sole. "I know it's not on the menu, but could you ask Chef to do me a tiny side bowl of black butter and a few capers? Thank you." The waiter nods anxiously. Of course, madam," he says, as if nothing could possibly be too much trouble for this lady. Her hair is shorter, and she has a Mediterranean look to her. But still Makari is afraid she will draw attention to herself, may be recognized. "Don't worry, Marquis. I didn't ever come to this place. It's where Leonard would bring people, if you know what I mean. And even if they thought I was me, they'd be wrong, wouldn't they?" "You really haven't changed." "Some things can't change. But thank God I'm not one of them. Poor Leonard. He's stuck with his lot." "I thought that's what you wanted." "It's for the best, but it's not necessarily what you would choose." "Have any of us got what we would choose?" says Makari. "It's a bloody mess. But as messes go, it's quite a fine one." She laughs, and her eyes sparkle. In the candlelight, all the years he has known her roll away. The waiter comes with his starter, and Makari eats his whitebait one by one. Every 4 fish, he takes a delicate bite of the buttered brown bread. He eats with his fingers the way you should, and the way you are prohibited from in places such as the Colonial Bankers' Club. "You still enjoy life," she says. Looking at her, that long and fateful afternoon reprises. On the sun-deck by the Bosphorus, drinking wine whilst Leonard and Seymour were away sailing. Of all the women he had ever had, she could never be sated. Like the sea, she came and she came. He holds up a small fish. "Nothing like the real thing. The catches we landed in Turkey, fresh from the sea." Imogen says, "It's still the same, over there." "Nothing is the same." Taki finishes his whitebait. "What good can come from this?" "We have to think about the greater things," says Imogen. Do you think they will get the Russian before I go back? I don't understand how you can fight so hard for this, and then return to the shadows. It is what's right. It's what we strove for, and not as if we have a choice. There is no free will here, Taki. This saddens him. If anybody's spirit was born to be free, it is Imogen's. He thinks about accidents of birth, raises his glass. To the Howards, he says. Imogen says, to what is right. And if there is a slip between the stirrup and the ground, as you say, I will confess. To your priest. She laughs. That will happen, come what may. The waiter brings Imogen's sole and Makari's calamari. He lifts a forkful to his mouth, tastes the sea. The flesh is tender, perfect and melting. He closes his eyes and sees the Black Sea, the sun dipping to a more eastern west. How is Mark? He asks. Imogen reaches down, picks up a small hand-sewn clutch bag, produces a 6x4 photograph and shows it to Taki. The young boy with the dark skin and the mop of jet-black hair and the straight nose smiles into the camera. Taki takes it, but Imogen grabs it back, returns it to the bag. I'm afraid you can't have it, she says. But I'm his father. Exactly. You don't know what it's like, Imogen. Oh, I do. But you shouldn't worry. I love him enough for the both of us. Too much can be as bad as too little, don't you think? We need to love, Marky. But we have to take it when and where we find it. 28. Staffe swivels in his chair, turns his back on Pulford and stares loosely into the wind-blown snow above Clothfair. The words garble. The truth beyond them rings untrue. Blears is dead. He took his own life, as if he were both pig and slayer. There's better news, though, sir, says Pulford. Better? Is that an appropriate term? For the case, yes. We can hook Chankov up to the development in Suffolk. The registered address and company secretary of Vod Blue matched to a Magellan Holdings. Magellan has registered a charge against the land up there. It relates to a profit-share agreement. Do you think he was extorting Howard? Shall I bring him in? I'll pay him a visit. Why would you do that? Says Pennington, coming into the room, twirling a pen between his fingers. He stands next to Staffe, placing a palm on his DI's shoulder. Staffe explains what he knows to Pennington, shows him the photograph of young Ludmilla and the charge sheets for the Shostovich rape. I think that maybe Elena was blackmailing Howard on Chankov's behalf to get him a fatter share of the profits in Aldersworth country town. He's supplying all the immigrant labour up there, making millions. He scared off the big UK contractors to get the job. Well, they'd never testify to that, says Pennington. Elena came to avenge her sister. Staffe taps the photograph of Ludmilla Shostovich and closes his eyes, recalls the first time he saw Elena Dania, pale and naked, beautiful and dead. She came with her brother Bobo. She tried to turn the tables on Chankov. Staffe picks up the charge sheets and slams them back down on his desk. You have nothing to prove that she was blackmailing Chankov or Howard. Staffe has been in a quandary all the way from Saltborough, and now, with heavy blood, he goes to his filing cabinet, reaches deep, puts his hand on the envelope marked Privat in Elena Danya's hand. But in the moment he thinks better. Lets go of the envelope. Pennington says, "You're just making all this up." "The truth is, sir, I can't prove Danya was blackmailing anybody. I need to speak to Bobo. He's the only one who can prove it was Chankov behind everything." Pennington stands, picks up the photograph and Vasily Chankov's rape charges and discharge from the army, gives them a final once-over. "I've made some inquiries of my own. You're right about Chankov, he is under pressure. His cousin is coming to live in London." "Uncle Ludo's son?" Pennington nods. "Nikolai. Quite the bastard by all accounts. He could buy and sell Vasily with his small change." He pats his DI on the shoulder. The contact is soft, implies with great force that Pennington wouldn't want to be Staffe. As Staffe passes through reception, Jumbo says, "Somebody to see you, Staffe," pointing as if to say, "Rather you." Brendan Stone sits, still as death. When he sees Staffe, his eyelids flutter. "You've heard," says Brendan, looking at the floor, "about the bastard killed my Rebecca." "He topped himself, Brendan." "You sure about that?" Stone looks up. His eyes are wet, his lips pursed to nothing. "I've seen the coroner's report." Brendan taps a rolled-up copy of the News' morning edition against his thigh. "I was thinking why he'd kill my Rebecca. I've been making my own inquiries." His eyes are dark and hollow. They blink fast and he bites his lip. He doesn't want to cry. Not here of all places. "I only know what's in front of me, Brendan. Have you got something for me?" "I've got more friends in Pentonville than you've got in this world, you bastard," says Brendan. "What have you got for me?" His voice is cracking. His fists are clenched. "I said before, the law has to run its course." "I want the one that done my Rebecca. The one that—" His head drops and his shoulders shake. Staffe wraps his arms around Brendan Stone. The man is hard as war, but he weeps like a Latin widow, incanting beneath his breath, within his sobs, over and over, 6 times. 6 times. His nose and cheeks and mouth are wet with tears. His voice like porridge, thick with the mucus of grief. Stone interlocks his fingers on the back of Staffe's neck and pulls until their foreheads rub. Staffe tries to pull away, but he can't. Brendan Stone's words are warm. 10 minutes later, walking down Cheapside and calling Janine, what Brendan said is stuck like silt in Staffe's mind. "Give him me. He stuck my Rebecca, and he's out there. I know. I know." Pulford is with Staffe in the niche he was in just 24 hours ago, before Blears had committed suicide, before they knew why Bobo Bogdanovich and Elena had come to England. They go up to Bobo's floor. It is dusk, and this is dead time in the junky streets. Everyone is done for the day, and only animals can be heard, the occasional clatter or curse from within the domestic as they pass along the deck. "I don't see how Bobo could work for Chankov. Not if he raped Bobo's sister," says Pulford. "They were working to a plan." "Well, how do we know it's him?" says Pulford. "He's in the photograph. It's clearly him." Pulford says, "But how do we know the girl is Ludmila Shostakovich? There's nothing to say the photograph and the charges have anything to do with each other." They reach Bobo's door. Staffe pats Pulford on the shoulder. "Good point, Sergeant." He knocks, and there is no reply. "You have the warrant?" Pulford shows him the document. They knock, and there is no reply, so Staffe brings out his ring of keys. On the third attempt, the lock yields, and Staffe stands to one side, lets Pulford lead. This time, there is no smell of furniture polish. No such luck. Even in the hallway, the smell of drains is thick and sweet and ripe, and Pulford pulls up the neck of his sweater over his nose. Staffe says, "Shit! We're too late." "Bobo!" calls Pulford, opening the bathroom door, sees nothing inside. Not the source of the smell. He advances slowly towards the bedroom door and lingers. "You want me to go in?" says Staffe. Pulford shakes his head and turns the handle, breathing deep as he does, looking at the floor, breaking himself in gently. He sees Bobo's shoes first, just inches from the ground. They sway, the slightest degree, by the draught from the door. The smell is tight as a headlock. Pulford takes a step towards, and Staffe says, "Come away. Leave this to forensics. Just check for a note. Go through the drawers. Here." He hands Pulford a pair of plastic mitts. "I should have called the station. Got someone round here last night." "You were with Josie. They'd have killed him come what may, David. Thank God you didn't get caught in the middle of it." Together they go through all Bobo's effects. It doesn't take long. Everything is gone, save a note in Russian signed Bogdanovich. When Pulford hands it to him, Staffe says softly, "Bastards." They step outside and close the door. "Stay here and wait for the Sockos." "Where are you going?" asks Pulford. Staffe puts heavy hands on each of Pulford's shoulders and crinkles his eyes. "Don't beat yourself up about this. We'll get these bastards." "Please tell me, sir, where are you going?" "Shoving my head where it doesn't belong." Sylvie doesn't take the usual pleasure as she applies the last stroke of varnish to the violin carcass. It is walnut, as Staffe had suggested, and it looks just fine. She has some good wine in the fridge for such occasions, the culmination of design, cutting and gluing, sanding and varnishing, the fretting and the acoustics. "You leave a little of yourself in there," Shivorsky, her maestro, once told her. It feels truer than ever tonight. She turns off the light and makes her way downstairs. She will drink the wine and flop in front of the telly. She may wake late and find him in the house. When he poaches her eggs, soft-yolked and teardrop-shaped, she feels certain that he loves her, despite any evidence to the contrary. On the sofa, she curls her legs under her bottom and takes a sip of wine. The phone rings, which startles her. It is her father. "I'm engaged, Dad," she says. "Who to?" says her dad, deadpan. "Don't be silly." "Are you pregnant?" "Dad?" "You want babies, though. I'm not getting any younger. Your mother, she—" "Oh, Dad, don't. Are you pleased for me?" "You'll be your own boss, won't you, love? You were always your own boss." "I still am." "That's my girl. Now, tell me what you want for Christmas." "Oh, it's okay, Dad." She knows he has precious little put by. Don't worry about me. This is a big day. My girl. I'll come see you. Christmas dinner. Don't forget. We'll both come. When they're done, she feels sad. She should call her father more, she knows, but she always feels low after. Feels, if she's honest with herself, that it is only a matter of time before she turns into a mother. It's not his fault. But if she doesn't see or speak to him, that possibility seems more remote. Chankov is sleekly dressed in a pale grey suit. The light picks out the pox in his face, and his colourless eyes flit left and right, as if there's plenty to be wary of. Violins hack at the perfumed air. A final movement. He leads Staffe into a sumptuous drawing room, fit for czars, and they sit opposite each other across an empire coffee table. "Stravinsky," says Staffe, looking at Chankov's wedding hand. The intaglio ring shines. He has big hands for such a small man. "He is a countryman of mine," says Chankov. "Not always popular. He had to make his life in foreign fields. Your intaglio must remind you of home." "I think your intelligence is the wrong kind, Mr. Wagstaff, at least for the purpose at hand." "These must be difficult times for you, Mr. Chankov, having to prove yourself all over again in these hard times. And now your cousin is coming." Chankov is taken aback, and for a moment it is possible to imagine him as a child, left all alone by cruel friends. "You should mind your own business." "My business is to find the killer of Elena Danya. I was hoping Bobo might cast some light." Chankov doesn't flinch or even blink. "Then why are you here?" Staffe takes out the photograph of Ludmila Shostovich and shows it to Chankov. He is unmoved. "You recognize the girl?" He shakes his head. "Elena's sister, Ludmila Shostovich." Chankov blinks, rapid, the glint from his eyes all gone. Staffe hands him a copy of the charge sheet, and his mouth opens like a coin slot. His pale face loses its final semblance of colour. When he speaks, it is quiet. His voice trembles. "Is there nothing these bastards won't do to bring shame on me?" He pours himself a glass of vodka from a cut-glass decanter and drinks it in one, standing with his back to Staffe. When he turns back, his face is set rigid, the eyes totally dead. "The whole truth cannot hurt me, Inspector. You were using Elena to blackmail Howard." Chankov raises his eyebrows, curls his bottom lip, as if considering an offer. "And why would I blackmail him?" "To get a share of the action up at Aldersworth. But Elena knew all about you and turned the tables. That's why you would have her killed." "You have a vivid imagination. And you have a charge registered against Howard's development company to protect your contract with him. Were you getting greedy, Vasily? Is there pressure from above? From your paymasters?" "You should be speaking with my accountant. I do as I am told." "Bobo is dead, too." "No. I would know." Chankov curses in Russian and goes to his telephone, speaks rapidly and slams down the handset. "My solicitor is coming." Staffe taps the photograph of Ludmila and her brother, says, "Recognize him?" Chankov peers at the image, shakes his head. "You surely don't think I killed Bobo?" Staffe shakes his head, takes back the photograph and the charge sheet. At the moment, I can't prove you killed anybody. Not recently. Not directly. As he waits for his solicitor, Vasily drinks vodka, becomes maudlin. Tell me about the letters Elena wrote you, says Staffe. She didn't. I saw the lilac envelopes. If you didn't kill her, the letters can only help you. They can't prove I killed her. Elena, the Shostovich girl. She killed herself. You don't know what it was like in that war. You need to be born to it. I wasn't. I was left alone in the world. You have to find ways to survive. Chankov looks at Staffe as he pours himself another vodka. You know that. You should tell me the truth, Vasily. It is an opportunity to preserve your honor. Your only chance. I know what is best for me. Someone killed Bobo. I can assure you, Inspector, it was done to damage me. He laughs. Was he really her brother? To think he knew enough to save me. Vasily stares into his glass, realizing how badly he has miscalculated the will of his enemies, and Staffe decides he has done enough for now. As he goes, the man with the scimitar sideburns looks daggers at him. He walks away down the Bishop's Avenue, every currency represented in sprawling Neo-Georgian and mock-Tudor splendour. England through the ages. Getting into his car, Staffe gets the wink from the onlooking, hidden Pulford. The elder watches the iron gates glide open. Not for a moment does he envy Vasily Chankov's wealth or power. In the back of his Bentley Mulsanne, the Russian cuts a sad figure. "That's him," says the elder, pointing from the driver's seat of his hackney carriage. His finger follows for a moment, then sweeps across the road to the sergeant's unmarked Mondeo. "But you won't have long. That's the lackey about to follow him," he says, pointing out Pulford, who pulls away, follows the Bentley at a safe distance. "Aren't we following them?" says the elder's passenger. "We don't need to. I have a device." "And you're sure it's him?" "You've seen the proof. I've told you what your daughter knew and why Elena was involved with him. It's up to you what you do with it, so long as you don't mention a word about us. Don't mess with us, Brendan. If you do, you'll be in mourning again." The elder starts the engine. Into the rear-view mirror he says, "But I know it won't come to that. This is a case of honour, yes?" In the back, Brendan Stone looks into the haunted eyes of Ludmila Shostovich, feels his heart tugged. His blood flows cold as he anticipates the moment he will stop this bastard in his tracks. He thinks of nothing more, all the way to Bow. When Pulford had arrived at the castle, he called Staffe, who said he would be straight round. Pulford explained there was an enormous brute on the back door, and the main door to the pub was closed. It seemed derelict from the outside. "How will we get in, sir?" he had asked. "I'll work something out," Staffe had said. "You make yourself scarce, Sergeant. I don't want to scare the horses by going in mob-handed." Now Staffe parks up. Parts of Bow have been taken over by artists and media artisans, but Shield Road seems beyond the wit of man. Its grim Victorian houses are boarded up, metal plates riveted to window frames and doorways, the easier for crack homes to stay unseen. Officially, the castle is still a going concern as a pub. It has a sign hanging and a flunkey's name above the door. Staffe knows how these places work. They buy in 6 kegs of Carling a week that go straight out the back, off to some other establishment. Like Pulford said, the front door is locked, and Staffe goes round the side, knocks twice, checking behind him. His heart bumps and his fingers tingle. He knocks again, preparing his carrot and his stick. 2 50s and no ride down the station. The further information that this place will be closed down soon, and he'll be out of work anyway. He knocks again, as hard as he can, and when he tries the handle, is amazed when it yields. Pulford was right about the brute. He has an oversized head, the same circumference as his neck, sloping straight to his shoulders. He wears training sweats with the arms cut off. His shoulders are like hams, the colour of fat. But, most importantly, he is horizontal. Flat out, at the top of the stairs down into the cellar, his legs are splayed and his arms crossed over his chest. The big man's face is split in two, his nose butterflied. Staffe strides over the man, goes down into the bowels of the pub. The steps to the cellar are steep, and the smell of stale beer blends with sweat and bleach. A narrow corridor runs between the basement rooms, and he gently presses open a door, peeks in, then another. The rooms must be soundproofed, so that in the corridor you can hear nothing of the Gomorrah within. In the first room, a man is at the rubber-envied mercy of a masked woman, who stands on an upturned crate, wearing only a strapped-on, flesh-coloured, make-believe cock. Staffe closes the door unseen and makes his way down the corridor. He is about to open the second door when he hears a high-pitched wailing from the end of the passage. A door is ajar, and he advances slowly, feeling each step, wanting to retrace, to leave this stone unturned, but knowing he can't. Too much suffering at the hands of this Russian, with hidden truths to bury. He reaches the door, pushes it open, tentatively. Inside it is dark, and the wailing louder, relentless. On the floor, in the centre of the room, is a young woman, barely more than a girl. She is naked, save for white ankle socks with a pink trim. Her blonde eyes look up at him beseechingly, and she says, "Look what they have done to him. What do I do now? Where do I go now?" She speaks in a faltering accent from beyond an iron curtain. Above her, Vasily Chankov is lashed to iron rings, attached to the ceiling beam. He hangs loose, as if Hieronymus Bosch has depicted Saint Sebastian. He is cut from ear to ear, from nipple to nipple, from his navel to his pubis, and down along his thighs. A pond of blood is thick as soup beneath him. He takes off his jacket, drapes it on the back of a chair, and moves slowly towards the body. "Too fucking late, Inspector." The voice comes from behind, and when Staffe turns, he sees a column of light, an outlined figure. A shadow falls fast across the downlit room, and Staffe smells metal, tastes blood in his mouth, sees the painted concrete floor rise slowly. A dull, deep pain washes all through him, and he waits for the ground to stun him. But he is out before he lands. Just the snapshot, crystal-clear image of Brendan Stone's face. Sharp-boned, dead eyes. The reprise of his pleading words, "Give him me! I know! I know!" in the bright black. 29. Pain skewers Staffe's head from his jaw to the crown of his skull. It sears from temple to temple. Lights flash behind his eyes like Roman candles, but he senses the flesh of a soft voice. His eyes flutter, and the light becomes white, then dulls. A shape forms, a pale face and cherub ruby lips. He knows the voice, watches the mouth make its shapes. "Staffe? Sir!" She's crying, this angel. "Move away," says a gruff voice from grim tales. Staffe's arms feel weak, and his face stings, his mouth tender. He pushes himself up from the floor, doesn't believe what he sees, even though he has seen it before. "Lie back," says Josie. Pennington says, "Stay where you are, Staffe. This is ours to take care of." "How many?" mutters Staffe, counting the long, deep cuts carved into Chankov. "7, he says, seeing that they have left the knife in. One more than Rebecca Stone. Staffe eases himself to his feet and totters. Josie and Janine support him, lead him to a bar stool. At his feet is a steel shovel, the handle cut down. It is what Brendan Stone had smitten him with. "Leave us be," says Pennington. "Everybody out." When they are alone, he stands over Staffe, says, "Is this what you wanted?" "Where's Brendan Stone?" Pennington looks quizzical. "Rebecca Stone's father?" "He must have followed Pulford." Staffe has a belated notion that he should say nothing. "If you weren't meddling, he couldn't have found Chankov." Pennington rubs his face with both palms, as if he is working on a persistent stain. "What the hell are we going to do? This bloody case won't lie in peace." Pennington crouches, settles on his haunches. "You bloody well told me about Chankov. You came with the evidence, and now the bastard's murdered. It was tidy. It's going to be that way again, Will. We'll have to think hard about what we can do with Stone, but it's not your decision. You're going to let this one lie." Staffe runs a finger gingerly along his cheekbone, feels his mouth, rubs a broken tooth. "Get yourself off to hospital. You've got concussion. Bloody lucky not to have a broken jaw." Pennington's phone rings and he responds to the caller with nods and monosyllables, then says, "Rebecca Stone's father, apparently." Staffe stands up, nursing his ribs, turning his battered mind to what he can possibly do about Brendan Stone. But he realises he hasn't got his jacket. He looks around the room, sees it on a chair by the pool of blood, a photograph sticking from the inside pocket. He goes across, stoops beneath the cross, Chankov above him, like religion gone horribly wrong. In this instance, as he plucks the image of the young child with the dark hair and the straight nose, and standing in the pool of Chankov's blood, cardinal red, he sees the light. Pennington says, "You had that evidence linking Elena and Chankov. That'll stick, be the end of it. A just end, wouldn't you say? So cut yourself this bit of slack, Will. It's the right thing, trust me." The right thing for who? It's from on high. Staffe takes a hold of the handle, opens the door. High-wattage scene lights blast a flat white light along the dark corridors in the castle's cellars. Officers in translucent synthetic suits dust the doors and bag discarded belongings. At the top of the stairs, the brute who had been on the door is being heaved onto a stretcher by 3 ambulance men. Outside, the bitter cold has taken the day early. Staffe shivers, knows he should go to hospital, but he has a grave decision to make. If he delays, these lives and deaths will be swept away for their own devices. He watches Pennington climb into his car and beckons Josie across. "I'll drive you to hospital," she says. He shakes his head. Each word hurts and he speaks low, so close to her ear he can smell the conditioner of her hair. "What the hell have they done to you?" Sylvie stands back, stabs her fingers into her hair, aghast. "I thought you wouldn't be back. I had a feeling. By the look of things, I was nearly right. You should see a doctor." "I can sort it out," he says, wincing as he talks. "Come with me." She leads him to the bathroom, dabs his broken face with lint dipped in iodine, saying nothing to comfort him when he grimaces. "My dad called. I told him about us." "What did he say?" mumbles Staffe. "He was pleased for me. I said we'd go over on Christmas Day. We can do that, can't we?" Staffe stares into the mirror, sees the back of her, forces his mind to another place beyond the pain. He will bring Brendan Stone to justice. This criminal who abandoned his daughter to her whore mother's charge while he was in and out of every jail in London with his drink and drugs, his violent robberies. Yet now he divines that he can screw up the law once and for all and play God with a knife. Or is the love of a father a mystical thing, as beautiful in measure as the horror of surviving your own children? And is the world a better place for the passing of a rapist, a war criminal? "Are you listening to me?" says Sylvie, tossing the blooded and indigo swabs into the basin. 30. Unmarked pursuit vehicles are parked up at each of the 3 exits to the Attlee estate. Any con worth his salt wouldn't touch this scene with the sharpened end of a bog brush, and that goes for Brendan Stone. Staffe slopes away from the invisibly sieged building and tries every shebeen and lock-in he knows from Bethnal Green to Bow, and all the way back up to Hackney. But nobody, apparently, has seen Brendan Stone. It would seem everyone has heard about his good deed, but the monkeys in these parts don't speak no evil. He makes his way back into the city, down the back streets from Shoreditch. As he walks across Finsbury Circus, the city workers mill in small numbers, and Staffe thinks he might be having a brainwave, but his matter is so fried he can't judge. The city is unnaturally quiet. He stops a man in a suit and an open collar. The man has a jaunt to his step and a smile on his face. "What's wrong?" says Staffe. "Wrong? Nothing's wrong." "Where has everybody gone?" The man scrutinises Staffe's cuts and bruises, then laughs, patting Staffe on the shoulder. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve. They've all got better places to be, except you and me." Beyond the man, the sun licks the Barbican Tower like a sign, like a wand upon his matter. Staffe says, "Merry Christmas," to the man's back, and as he does, he laments Brendan's orphan granddaughter, left all alone in the world when her mother was murdered. He says the name of that daughter of slain Rebecca, Elena, and thinks about the opportunities she will never have, the slim chance she won't go the way of her mother, and her mother's mother. "You can't just turn up here. Call first." Rosa looks at her wrist, even though she wears no watch. He can smell stale Chinese food and cigarettes. "I wanted to see if you're all right." She blocks the doorway by leaning against the frame with an outstretched arm. "You want me to go?" She nods. This contravenes the nature of their relationship. They're frank, direct. He waits for a truth to betray itself in her eyes. She looks past him, dead still, waiting for him to go. But a cry emerges from within, and he finally hears what he came for. A baby cries. A baby cries, and Staffe hears the unadulterated pure love of a father imploring the infant to be well. "Shush, Elena. It's all right. It's all right." "He couldn't leave her," says Rosa. "He has nobody to take her. You've seen Nicola. She couldn't tend a baby. Just let him be, Will. I beg you." "No," says a voice from inside. Rosa turns around. Behind her, Brendan Stone, granddaughter in arms, stands in a half-light. In these moments, Staffe knows what must be done. He doesn't despair at the 1,000 repercussions to the decisions he has to make today. In this moment, in the company of the whore and the murderer, he is filled with wonder at all the different love there is in this city. Brendan raises the child to his face, and he kisses her cheek. Elena gurgles, smiles at her granddad. As he hands her to Rosa, Elena reaches out for him with her tiny, pudgy hand. Staffe takes a hold of Brendan by the soft flesh under his arm. "I'm sorry I hurt you," says Brendan to Staffe, looking back at the infant child. Rosa says, "You can't take him away from her, Will." "I can't not," says Staffe. Brendan says, "It's the only place I can be." He looks up at Staffe. "Isn't it?" Staffe thinks of what consequences will flow in the wake of Chankov's death. "You need to look out for yourself, Brendan," says Staffe, shuddering to think that a jailbird like Brendan thinks prison the safest place for a villain. "The damage was done a long time ago," says Brendan. "You know, I thought it was the right thing, truly I did. I believed it all." "Believed what?" "That a wrong would be righted, that I'd find a kind of peace, at least some satisfaction." Brendan Stone looks at Staffe pleadingly. "He did kill her, didn't he? That Russian bastard." "Who told you that?" "For the love of God," says Brendan, led away by Staffe, before the infant Elena sees her granddad fall completely to pieces. 31. Christmas Eve, babe, in the drunk tank. The butcher's hook is half market workers, half coppers from the night shift. It's barely lunchtime, but you'd think it was midnight. The pub has been hosting the crack since before dawn. "Is it true?" says Josie. Her eyes are moist and heavy-lidded, half-moon and waning. "Christ, sir, you should get some stitches." She touches his nose and puts a finger on the corner of his mouth. "Is what true?" says Staffe, nursing his pint. Josie could be asking him if it is true that there's an almighty stink brewing since he brought Brendan Stone in yesterday. "About you and Sylvie getting married." They are partially obscured from the throng by a gaming machine. She takes a step closer, all cocoa and ethanol. Her lips are plump and her makeup all wiped away. "How do you know?" She looks over her shoulder towards Pulford, who is necking with the WPC from Community Liaison. She turns back, places a hand on Staffe's chest, the in of her thigh pressed to his knee. "A little birdie?" Staffe puts his hands on Josie's shoulders, and she looks up at him, goes tippy-toed with her eyes closing, and he kisses her on the cheek, whispering in her ear, "Merry Christmas, Josie." He takes a step in and wraps his arms around her, and they sway away with toothless Shane. And when the song is done, Staffe says, "I'm through." He releases her, and she totters a step back, holds the gaming machine. "Through?" She scrunches her eyes at him. "You did a great job, Josie." "We were right. We were all right about Blears and Chankov and—" She looks puzzled. "I have to go," says Staffe. "Stay?" Pulford comes across, holding 2 bottles of Beck's between the fingers of one hand. "Dance with this young lady, would you, Sergeant?" "Bugger off," says Josie, pushing between them both, heading for the bar. Over Pulford's shoulder he sees Johnbaugh come in. He stays by the door, beckons Staffe. He says to Pulford, "Be at Howard's house, first thing in the morning, like we said." Pulford gives him a resigned look. Staffe pushes his way towards the door, past Josie, staring into a drink. In a crowd of people, she looks all alone. "You've got it," says Staffe to Johnbaugh. "There aren't that many courts. His charge sheets helped. He even got done at that school. Ampleforth. Expelled for insolence, apparently. He moved back home with his mother in 2003. She has the same address still, but now it's a flat. He's shown a heap of different addresses ever since 2005. John hands Staffe an A4 envelope. "Are you going to tell me what you're up to?" "I really appreciate this," says Staffe. "Merry Christmas, John. Give my love to Catherine." "I could come with you." "It's Christmas, John. You have a good one." Outside, he takes shelter from the whistling cold in the high Victorian splendour of the meat market. Staffe leans against an iron pillar. It soars above him, all the way up to the intricately worked, many-gabled roof. Cardinal Bernard Audley stares up at him into the camera. The Pope smiles, and Bernard does not. Bernard wears his crimson cassock, which, according to the caption beneath, recalls the heroism of the martyrs. It is the symbol of a love for Jesus and his church that knows no bounds. The article predates poor Imogen's South American death by 3 weeks, and, as far as Staffe can calculate, she was already in that far-flung Christian continent. Further down the account of the consistory for the creation of Bernard, the Pope referred to Mark's Gospel, said, "To serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." He returns the research to its envelope, looks at the archive of pictures the case has issued him. Ludmila Shostovich, staring forlorn beside Brother Bobo. Roddy Howard with his arm draped around his sister's suitor. The dark-haired child of the East with the straight nose. Uncle Bernard and His Holiness. Gary Mulplant looks Staffe dead in the eye as he saunters up to the detective inspector in the bar of the Thamesbank Hotel. He is in his civvies, carries a suit hanger over his shoulder, says, looking at Staffe's face, "What happened to you?" "You're finished," says Staffe. "What?" Mulplant loses his composure. His shoulders slump, and he holds his suit hanger in front of him like a shield. "For Christmas. You've finished working for now." Mulplant smiles, unconvincingly. "Did you hear that the man you ID'd has killed himself?" Mulplant nods. "You should be bloody ashamed of yourself." "I saw him." "You enjoy your Christmas, Gary. I've got too much to do right now, but in the new year I'm coming back. I've got new evidence, and I'm having you. You'll never work in this or any other industry again. You're going inside, young man." "I'm not. They... Nothing. There's no one left who knows the truth about that day. Only you. I'm going to leave you alone for a week. You'll have a worse fate in their hands." "Well, you can't talk to me like this. I've the name of a lawyer." "Is it a Sir Ralph Wakeman?" "What?" Mole Plant switches his weight from foot to foot. "He's going to be too busy to represent a nobody like you." Staffe stands down from his bar stool, tells the bartender to make himself scarce, which he does without saying a word. "Describe Elena for me. What she did that afternoon when she came here." "She was beautiful. I mean, really beautiful." "How?" "Fair and tall. Everybody stopped. She turned all our heads." "All?" "Well, there was me and Victor, the concierge, and a guest, an Arab man." "How did she move?" "Like she didn't touch the floor. She was in a fur. She had a phone call, went to the windows, I think." Gary narrows his eyes, seems happy to drift back to see her again. "The large windows overlooking the river, and she had her back to me, and..." "And what, Gary?" "And I wanted to touch her. Anybody would." "What did she say?" "I wasn't listening." "They hadn't come up to you yet?" "No." Mole Plant looks up, eyes wide. "Who? Who do you mean?" Staffe takes a hold of Mole Plant, presses his thumbs to the sweet spots behind his ears. "I'm going to show you a photograph. If you saw this person on the afternoon that girl was murdered here, you nod. If you didn't, you stay perfectly still. You understand?" Mole Plant nods. Staffe releases him, takes the photograph from his jacket, shows it to the bellboy. Mole Plant nods. Up at Jarndyce Road, it had been impossible to tell whether Darius Accourt had flown his coupe. The place looked no different, but on his way out Staffe had seen Stanislav, the builder, loading up his pickup. He had told Staffe that he and his workers were driving for the port. They had a Dover crossing and said that with a bit of luck they would be in Minsk for Christmas dinner. Their wives and mothers and brothers and children would all be there. And he told him, too, that Darius Accourt had scarpered first thing, with a haversack and an anxious face. Stan reckoned he wouldn't be back any time soon. Darius's mother, Geraldine Accourt, according to John Bore's investigations, lives in the attic of a grand house on Warwick Way, overlooking the canal at Little Venice. "I used to own the whole building," she told Staffe, with more pride than sadness in her face, as she showed him into her home. When they separated, her husband got nothing from the divorce, and she kept this house, garnering sufficient rent from having split it into flats to live quite nicely. The bastard husband now lives with a younger version of herself, she tells Staffe without malice. "He will pay for his transgression," she says, with absolute confidence. "And what about Darius?" Geraldine's face melts at the mere mention of his name. "Has he been messing around again? You can't imagine how hard it hit him. All that upset. He was such a wonderful, kind child. He's still that same person, you know. I'm so proud of all the things he has done." "Do you still see him?" Not since he moved to Greece. He's so busy with his music and his art, and so many friends. He was always such a popular boy, He took such a knock, you know, when we had to bring him from Ampleforth. You do know he went to Ampleforth?" Staffe can't bring himself to tell Geraldine that he knows Darius was expelled. He wonders if Darius might have got himself expelled to avert the shame of their sudden lack of funds. Did he fall on a sword at such an age, all those years ago, to preserve a reputation? Has he misjudged the young man? Is there something wrong, Inspector? Staffe also can't bring himself to tell Geraldine à Court that her darling Darius is not in Greece. So he says, "One of his bad influences, I'm afraid. A young man called Roddy Howard." Mrs. à Court nods sagely and takes a shoebox from the drawer of a Queen Anne secretaire. She is a quite striking woman, with a narrow, pale porcelain face and bobbed golden hair, but dressed 10 years beyond her age in a knitted twinset. She issues not an ounce of allure, and seems to Staffe perfectly pious. "Roddy Howard," she says. "Such a very good family. He and Darius were ever so close, a couple of years ago when Darry first went to Greece." She proffers a photograph, of the same hue as the one Staffe had seen in Roddy's album. "He knew the Howard boy at school. He was in the year above, and I think there was something." "Something?" "Darry was quite obsessed for a while. I'm told it's normal. I spoke with my bastard husband about it, and he said it was all part of growing up and being English. He laughed about it. Roddy even came here one half-term when we had the whole house. There was such a hoo-ha about it beforehand. Darry wanted it to be just so." "Didn't Darius go out with Roddy's sister?" "Arabella. I know about her. We have friends in common, from Ampleforth. Darius has a fickle heart, a good heart." "He was comfortable in those circles?" asked Staffe. "He is of those circles, Inspector. A chance circumstance, one bad business decision, does not undermine everything." "Darius gets his breeding from you, I suspect," says Staffe. Geraldine cannot help herself. She smiles from ear to ear. "À Court is not his father's name, you know. My father had no sons. I was an only child." Geraldine looks ashamed. "My father allowed Peter, my bastard husband, to take my hand on the condition that he also took my name." "Peter is your ex-husband, surely?" "The à Courts don't divorce, Inspector." "Ah," says Staffe, "like the Howards." "Exactly. A wonderful family in so many respects. But that daughter, my word." "Not everybody can be blessed with good children. We take that for granted, I suppose." "I take it you are a father, Inspector?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss my personal situation whilst on business." "Of course. And your business, have I been of any help?" "I think so, Mrs. à Court." "Can I ask what Roddy has done?" Staffe shakes his head. He imagines Darius à Court under his mother's spell, his grandfather's too. All that history on his bony shoulders, and probably an entirely different strain from his bastard father's blood, and all tits up, until he met Roddy Howard at school and followed him to Greece. Then Roddy's sister, with the same thing to offer, but more, perhaps. A few lean years, and a grand plan unfolds, culminating in a request, accompanied by a promise from the highest deity. In anybody's estimation, an Arabella à Court, née Howard, would redress each and every balance. I'm sure Darius will tell you all about Roddy next time you see him, Mrs. O'Court. Does he have any plans to return home?" "I'll be the last to know," says Geraldine. "How youth is wasted on the young." She flutters her lashes, and for an instant he sees the maiden her, with all the world ahead. Staffe promises to pass on her regards to the Howards, and as he leaves her to a steeped, confected peace, he thinks of Brendan and Rebecca Stone. Fathers and daughters, and mothers and sons. He closes the door on Geraldine O'Court, tries not to imagine her all alone on Christmas morning. Gone twilight, and the city is dead. Just the odd gaggle of smokers, and thin trails of people in suits and Santa hats making their ways down into the tube. A wisping mist comes off the Thames. The bosses seem like something from greetings cards. Staffe looks up at the slice of old England. The Colonial Bankers' Club is tall and slim, built from red brick and dressed with stone. A Jacobean tower squashed in by a Victorian branch of Glyn's, and an 80s infill of glass and steel. To let. He rehearses what he will say, but his words smudge. He pushes open the door, holds up a hand to the steward, his collar stiff and his mouth agape at the unpretty picture of Staffe's battered face. "Don't worry, Dickinson, I'll find my own way." And he strides towards the dining hall, opens the double doors, looking around the room. Here and there, diners look up, wonder what such a specimen is doing here. In the far corner, at a small table under a portrait of Thomas Coutts, Staffe sees what he wants. When Howard and Macari see Staffe coming, his face cut and swollen, they look at each other, frowning. "Merry Christmas, gentlemen," he says, pulling up a chair, sitting between them. "I come bearing gifts." Howard's smile remains tight, resolute. "Your children miss their mother most, I imagine, this time of year, Mr. Howard. Especially Roddy." Macari intervenes. "You have no idea." He folds his napkin, his cheese only half eaten. He dabs at his mouth, and a petal of port stains the linen. "I don't understand what you have to gain, Taki." Macari shrugs. Staffe turns back to Howard. "And Uncle Bernard, does he ever get in touch after what happened?" "What did happen, Inspector?" "His first consistory. You missed it." Howard says, "This is becoming tiresome, Mr. Wagstaff." He raises a hand, beckons a waiter. The waiter arrives at the table, and Howard says, "This man is leaving, Samuel. Please show him out." Staffe turns to the waiter, hisses, "If you want me off the premises, tell Dickinson to call the police." "Why exactly have you come?" says Howard. Staffe addresses Macari. "In your case, new blood comes and new blood goes, but for others, life goes on the way it has for centuries. The Howards have been solid so long it shouldn't surprise us." "Surprise?" says Howard. "That you emerge unscathed from the death of Elena." "What is the point of this?" "I said I have a gift. Chankov's ass is in a sling for you." "There was a time when you thought I was responsible," says Macari. "It pays to keep faith." "Faith," says Staffe. "Faith in what is right." "How long will he serve?" "Oh, forever." as you know. Staffe stands. But he left a few crumbs. Crumbs, says Howard, colour draining from his face. Like Hansel and Gretel, but easier to read. I've been reading about your family, the original line, before you ran out of genes. John Howard, that's with the A, of course, helped kill the princes in the tower, so they say. That's conjecture, and a long time ago, says Howard, unflustered by what he sees as Staffe's little joke. It would mean murder was in the family. Merry Christmas, says Staffe, turning his back. From the door he looks back, at Thomas Coutts looking down on one of his own. Howard is signing his account, making hasty arrangements. Staffe cannot remember when London was ever like this. Such empty streets. The door to Sanderson's jingles behind him, and the old boy behind the counter, in his moleskin apron, peers over his pince-nez. He puts the perused gems back in the safe and prepares to close the oldest jewellers in the square mile. Staffe feels the velvet box, wonders if this booty will be enough to save his skin tomorrow. He swings his arms as he crosses Cornhill, the Bank of England to his right. He's pleased with what he has done, and watches a big red bus sail into the River Fret. He picks up the news from a vendor who is finishing up, and pops into the jam pot, otherwise known as the Jamaica Inn. He used to come here with Jessup, after an offal lunch in the George and Vulture, for a pint, and some old time's sake. It is easy to see why the men come here, mainly in their wands, and leaning on the wooden bars in the tiny wooden snugs with their beer and their newspapers, the sawdust beneath their feet and the dim lights above their heads. But there is no escaping, for Staffe, the fact that it is Christmas Eve. He can't bear the thought of home, and having to tell Sylvie he can't be with her tomorrow. So, to kill the eve, he opens the paper and drinks his pint. In the news, Nick Absalom is trying to make sense of the slaying of Vasily Chankov, intimating that his murder at the hands of Brendan Stone might be the collateral damage of oligarchical muscle flexing. Staffe drinks lustily from his pint and mulls Absalom's words, considering an even bigger picture. Suddenly, he feels unsuitable for what awaits him tomorrow.
End of Disc 8. Disc 9.
Christmas Day. Staffe wakes, groggy. He can hear children playing, so knows he has slept deeply. Sylvie is asleep still. He doesn't want to wake her, and knowing what he must do today of all days, he chooses to leave her sleeping. As a child, Will had always awakened in the dead of night, Christmas Day. He would lie in bed, rigid with stifled anticipation at what Santa might have brought him. Eventually his father would come in, and he would pretend to be asleep, allow himself to be jostled awake. His mother and father would sit cross-legged in their pyjamas on the living-room floor, amongst the nest of wrapping paper, playing with him, making up the numbers for Cluedo and Kaplunk. He showers warily, so as not to disturb Sylvie, nor reopen his cuts or alarm his bruises. Dressed, he chomps a muesli bar and swigs a coffee on the hoof, looking for his phone and eventually finding it in the lounge. On his way out of the room, he clocks a golden parcel in the fireplace, where Santa would have left it. "Open it," says Sylvie, rubbing her eyes, arms wrapped around herself in the doorway. "Oh, when I come back." "Come on, Will." "We'll have more time. Let's not rush it." "I have a bad feeling, Will." "Where are you going?" "It's Christmas Day. We should be together." "It's just some work I have to do." We're supposed to be going to my dad's. I told you. He walks to her, puts his arms around her, but she pushes him away, says, I'll think of something to say to him, shall I? I've got you something special. I have a bad feeling. Oh, don't be silly. I'll be fine. I'm talking about me, she says. At least open your present. He opens the golden parcel, feels a slow wash of melancholia as the kindness is revealed. A full set of Sabatier knives. On the canteen, Sylvie has written, I took a quid from your pocket, so this is not a gift. Cook for me. He sits in the spoonback, recalculates. He might not need to go until after lunch. His phone rings. It is the code for Saltborough, and he immediately knows it is a mariner's call. The man says, I'd say they'll be on their way soon, once the tides are right. And when's that? Couple of hours. They're all provisioned for a trip, from what I've seen. Staffe imagines the harbour master peering out into the marina through binoculars. He hangs up, puts the knives down, remembering how Vasily Chankov died, slashed until his flesh hung in tatters from his bones. Sylvie says, Give me my present before you go. At least stay until I've opened it. Well, let's wait until we have time together. I have to go now. You haven't got me anything. Is that what you think of me? He says. I know you. You bloody don't, he thinks, gathering his keys and wallet and phone together, brushing past her. Oh, you leave me then, you bastard. On Christmas Day. He puts the wallet and phone in his jacket pocket, feels the velvet box, the emerald pendant safely secreted within. The younger watches the inspector drive away. He recognises that look in the eye, has seen it often in the faces of supposed enforcers of law. He had told the elder what the inspector would do, and they had discussed the need to grasp the horns. The finer details are his own. He has the measure of the inspector, knows he can shake him free of this case once and for all. He has prepped her place, knows it inside out, knows exactly how she would most likely, accidentally, come to grief. As Staffe drives the empty roads north and east to Suffolk, he looks again at the image of the murderer as finally and reluctantly verified by poor, ambitious, fucked-up Gary Mulplant. The phone rings. It is Pulford, telling him that Leonard Howard and Roddy and Arabella have just climbed into Leonard's Bentley. He inquires as to whether he should follow. No, I'll be waiting for them, says Staffe. The roads are too clear today, they'll notice you, says Staffe, looking in his rear-view mirror. The silver Mondeo drops back again. It has been with him all the way. Oh, what should I do? Give them a head start, then make your way to Warblingsea Harbour. Keep your phone on and your head down. I've got the records from McCourt's phone, sir. You were right. He got a call from the Colonial Bankers Club an hour before Daniel was murdered. Staffe hangs up. As he drives, he pictures the movements of Darius Accourt that day, sees it in sepia. Sylvie puts the Sabatier canteen back in its gift box, makes a space for it in the cupboards at the bottom of his dresser, and boils the kettle to make herself an instant coffee. She sits at the table in the kitchen and wraps her hands around the mug. It is an oversized souvenir from Copenhagen, a mermaid's tail swirled around the handle. She bought it for herself on a long weekend she and Staffe took, the first time they were together. She only brought it over here to his place a week ago. He hadn't noticed. Sylvie hears the front door go, and her heart bumps. It isn't him, she's sure of it. He has his own practically silent way of coming into a house. Even so, she calls, "Will?" Silence. Sylvie grips the mug tighter, and the heat within makes the pads of her fingers tingle. She stares at the door, wants to call out to start again, but something between her heart and her throat stops her. She hears a tread in the hallway, the whine of a door being opened, then closed. Sylvie wants to leap up and grab her phone and call the police, but this feels ridiculous. Could it be Pulford? Or did she leave the radio on? A heavy creak in the hallway. The creak of a person. He appears in the kitchen doorway, making not such a large shape and forcing a thin smile. His face is ruddy, and he has a scar down his forehead. It is fresh, pink. "I won't harm you," he says. "Not unless I have to." Sylvie knows she should scream. The mug is beginning to burn her now, and her hands yearn to tremble, so she grips tighter and she feels sick. Her stomach, shrunken, gives up on her, and she turns her head so she cannot see this man. "It is Christmas," she says. "I have to visit my dad." "Not today," says the man, coming towards her. "You're going to do everything I say when I say it. And if you don't get to see your dad, ever, don't blame me. It's that fucking boyfriend of yours. You get me?" Staffe considers everything that has been done to maintain this secret. How much suffering has bled into so many lives. In this context, he should fear for himself, but today, all he can think of is the plight of Brendan Stone and the lonely, lonely death of Graham Blears. This is a day to right the wrongs. He steps down into Imogen 2, goes below decks. He is not surprised to see Darius at court, but has never before seen the woman sitting at the table in the saloon, sipping from a cup. She is sun-dried and skinny, has her hair cut short and side-parted. She wears an offshore sailing coat and salopettes, dressed to go. "Imogen," he says. "Inspector," says Imogen Howard, "I am right and you are wrong. I have papers to prove who I am." "Whoever you claim to be, I see you're planning to harbour criminals." "You should be careful what you say, Inspector," says the elder, emerging from the aft cabin. "I see you didn't get the chance to take Chankov in." "It seems that in this world you can bury the truth," says Staffe. "Well, surely this case is laid to rest." "You'd be amazed." "And so would you, Inspector. Throughout this investigation, from the moment you began to mudsling, we have made it our business to keep abreast of developments. You have nothing to hold against us." It would have been edifying to talk some more with Bobo Bogdanovich, and Vasily Chankov for that matter. "We should all celebrate the death of such a man," says the elder. "And because of you, Brendan Stone will serve life, as if losing his daughter wasn't enough." Staffe looks around the cabin. "Where's that shitty little mercenary of yours, the one who likes to beat up on women? I'd like him to know I'm not done with him." "Why are you here, Inspector?" says Imogen. "I've come to see Darius. I need to talk to him." Staffe looks at Darius, who seems somehow diminished. "I'd like to know what your plans are now that Arabella is returned. Will you help her all the way back into that fold? I would have thought there would be rewards for a saviour like you." "We look after people we love. It's not a crime," says Darius. The elder's phone rings. He answers, listens, and his face sags into a frown. It is an expression Staffe has not seen on him before. After protestations, the elder holds out the phone to Staffe, says, "This will have to play out. You'd better speak to him." "Who?" "The younger." A lazy voice at the other end says wearily, "Hello? Who's that?" Staffe recognises the voice. "Sylvie? Are you all right? Where are you?" "Is that you, Will?" "Where are you?" "I'm tired. So tired." "No point trying to do anything, Inspector. Just do what you're told," says the younger. His voice is soft and he seems calm, assured. "I won't be fucked about. This is going to end. Today, you understand? Don't touch her." "I won't need to. She's a clumsy thing. An accident waiting to happen." "I can trace this call." "Not to me, you can't. Now hand me back to the elder." "I'll find you." Staffe hands the phone back and sits heavily at the chart table, wanting to grab the elder, to rattle him until he gives the word for Sylvie to be released, until he bleats out the truth, all of it and nothing but. However, he knows he is a step behind and that the elder is beyond his reach. He turns to Imogen Howard, says to her, "You can go. I'm not here to stop you." "What about Darry?" Imogen says. "You'd be a fool to take him with you." "I need crew. Darry's a dab hand." "You've got family can help you out with that." "You'd let me go? Just like that?" says Imogen. "The power of love," says the elder, putting his phone into his pocket. "Our friend, the younger, seems to have everything in hand." Staffe tries to block out what could be happening to Sylvie. Is unable. "There's nothing as powerful as love, like you say, Darius," he says. "I'm not falling for your games," says Darius. "It's not a game. They called you from their club, just an hour before she was killed." "That's a lie." "It's an alibi for them, a noose for you." "I should be careful if I was you, Inspector," says the elder. "I spoke to the bellboy. He never saw Blears." "That's bullshit," says Darius. He looks at the elder, desperation oozing from his pores in the cabin chill. "You're not really a dealer, Darius. You haven't got that in you, have you? But you had enough coming in to look after yourself and Ara. You lived in that shit-old squat, but you always had the readies to get wasted or high, and to eat and go out partying. Leonard was bankrolling you, wasn't he?" "Why would he?" "You couldn't know it would escalate the way it did, or that Elena would push things too far. But to be a Howard, Darius, that would mend everything that ever went wrong with your life." Staffe weighs Geraldina Court's love for this son, considers the hand the poor boy was dealt by his parents. "I know why you did it, Darius. Honestly, I do. I've visited your mother, and I understand. I know what is at stake for you and her. You are trying to secure a future, preserve your past." "This is bullshit," says Darius. "Let him finish," says the elder, his eyes flitting fast as thoughts. "I know it wasn't your idea. How would you ever come up with such a thing, and why would you?" Staffe looks at Imogen. "You probably didn't even know that Elena had found out about Imogen not being dead. that Leonard had concocted a way to bury the shame. Staffe takes out the photograph of the dark young boy with the straight nose. "Your son," he says to Imogen. "Too bad, to bear a Turk's bastard in the wake of Uncle Bernard's finest hour." What?" says Darius, a step or two behind. "I adopted this boy. I have the papers. And you forget I have no Uncle Bernard. I'm not her. We buried her. That your uncle could become cardinal. How proud the family must have been." Staffe says to Darius, "When they said Elena was a problem and she had to go, did they promise, if you could do that thing for them, and if you could deliver Arabella back into the fold, which was your game all along, you would be welcomed into the family with open arms?" Darius turns to the elder, who looks away. "Of course they did. And of course you couldn't resist. You knew that if you hadn't killed Elena, someone else would have. You knew what a conniving bitch she was. She tried to split you and Ara up, didn't she?" "Shut up!" shouts Darius. He looks at Imogen now, imploring help. "Tell him!" "Is this what you're proposing, Inspector?" says Imogen. "I'm proposing the truth. It's all I know, I'm afraid." "And your fiancée?" says the elder. "She can be exchanged for this truth?" "The world will see that Darius was the one who dragged Arabella down. Your daughter can return to her family and all will be well. I have no vendetta, provided nothing, and I mean nothing, happens to Sylvie. I just want the murderer." "And Leonard and I," says Imogen. "As you said, I can't disprove that you are someone else. And it's not my business anyway. All that matters to me is you had nothing to do with the murders. Leonard may have to wait for his knighthood, I guess, but your name will be saved." He turns to the elder. "But Sylvie will have to be brought to somewhere safe, to someone I can trust." "But it's not true," says Darius. "Isn't it?" says the elder. "We'd look after you, you know that." "We could just let it lie," says Darius. "You've got his fucking girlfriend, for Christ's sake." "I need to talk to you," says Imogen to the elder. "Just for a minute." She walks into the bespoke airlock in the bow of the boat, and he follows her. Their voices are low, muffled, impassioned. Staffe hisses to Darius, "Listen, and listen well. I have the proof, you hear me? The bellboy told me he saw you that day. I'm afraid your fate is nailed to the mast." Darius looks at Staffe, open-eyed, like the adolescent in the photograph again, as if he would quite happily lose himself in his mother's skirts. As if in a trance, he says, "I can't trust anybody." "They're cashing you in, Darius. It's not a question of trust. The truth has come to take you." The doors to the airlock open and close. Imogen's face is set. She says, low and even, "There is only one way this can work. When the family arrives, Roddy sails with me." "You'll be crossing Biscay," says Staffe. "Just the two of you." "We have Lord Admirals to our name, Inspector. I think we can tackle Biscay," says Imogen, as if the elements cannot touch her. The elder says, "Arabella can enter a programme of rehabilitation, and Leonard will issue a statement explaining his disappointment and his hope for a recovery. The Crown will look kindly upon Darius. He will be represented by Sir Ralph Wakeman. You will process him, and you will lay this case to rest. If you can agree, I'll speak to the younger. Otherwise, You have other people you care for. A nephew, I believe. You bastards. You can't judge us, says the elder. Staffe tries to work out where Sylvie might be. Tries not to picture the state she's in, drugged or otherwise sedated by the sound of her. He knows what is right, what he should do, but this is no time to bring Rebecca's killer to book. He says to the elder, "You'll bring Sylvie to Ledengate. Once I've seen her, I will process the charges. And once that happens, the harbour master will give you the all clear." "I need to see Arabella," says Darius. His voice is frail, warbling. His face the grey of bad truths dawning. The elder takes Staffe's hand and they shake. Staffe wants to ask if it was his bastard accomplice, the younger, who ran Rebecca through with a knife because of what she learned from Elena on that trip to the seaside. The younger, who has Sylvie's life in his hands. Staffe's pulse quickens. "Is there any unfinished business?" asks the elder. "What we know and what we can prove are often different. Sometimes we have to wait for a missing element. I have nothing whatsoever on you or your friend. I don't even know your names. But be assured, if I ever come across him again, this will not happen." Staffe wants to whip this cold, calculating man into shape. Wishes he had brought one of his new knives with him. His hands have formed fists, and his face must betray him, because the elder takes a step back, reaches into his jacket, and with the imperceptible curl of a wrist, he unleashes the full extent of a telescopic steel cosh. In the same instant, a car parks up outside. There are 3 slams of the doors. The elder says, "Are we on the same hymn sheet?" Staffe nods. The elder pushes the cosh back into itself, and they each watch as the Howard family come below decks. First Roddy, then Leonard, and finally, weak on her feet and leaden with medication, Arabella. When she sees her daughter, Imogen emits a low, strangulated wail, like something from another culture. Huddled between father and brother at the bottom of the steps, Arabella is bewildered. Leonard ushers her towards her mother, and the truth dawns. No apparition. This is a resurrection. Arabella cannot believe what she sees. "It's all lies," she says. Darius goes to her, puts an arm around her, and guides Arabella towards Imogen, whispering that he loves her, that he is going away. "For our love," he tells her. "I'm going away for our love." But Arabella doesn't understand. She lets herself be wrapped in her mother's arms. The 2 women stand there like that, until the elder and Howard prise them apart. "I have to go," sobs Imogen. She turns to Roddy. "Are we ready?" Roddy comes to her, whispers something which makes her smile approvingly. "I will see you again," says Arabella, now in her father's arms. "Oh, before you know it. I love you, Bella." "Whenever people say that, they leave me." Arabella shrugs off her father and reaches for Darius, who looks at Staffe. Each wishes for a better solution. The elder leads the way above decks, and Imogen says to Leonard, "There is a greater good, isn't there?" "Of course, my love." To see his jaw weak, you might think he doubts the wisdom he inherited. The younger looks in his rearview mirror, sees the shape of the inspector's fiancée in the back of the ambulance. She lies still now. He had to calm her down whilst the pills worked their magic. He can't abide people who hit women, and he feels ashamed at what is sometimes necessary on this path that chose him. When this is all done, he will go to Ireland, spend a week in retreat before he visits his mother. She has a lovely new place now, a long way from the Falls Road. Same country, different world. Her garden runs all the way to the Shannon banks. He will fish, and she will call him for dinner, and then he will walk into the village, have a pint or two in this place where nobody knows him. The elder has assured him that after this there will be no calls for a good while. This job requires that the dust settles good and proper. It is always difficult when the police get involved. The bastard's girlfriend moans in her half-sleep, murmuring into the muzzle he has put on her. He has planned quite meticulously how he will tend her. He has everything that is required in the glove compartment, and it will be administered in her house. Her attic is stacked to the gunnels with varnish and lacquer and other flammables. She will have spilled some on her clothes and been careless with a candle, then fallen asleep. He is confident that further measures will not be necessary. If all goes well, he will be on a ferry from Fishguard by first light tomorrow. It will be Boxing Day, and his brothers will have gone back to Liverpool by then. No loss. Ignorant bastards. In the mirror, he watches as he presses the salmon-pink, soft new flesh of his scar. If he presses hard, it pains him, in a sweet way. Putting the key to the ignition, he prays his mother will not concern herself with what has happened to him. As he drives away along a mews-lined cobbled street, he makes a small detour, pauses at the gated entrance to a private garden square. Where the garden meets the street, the church nestles back. This is where the elder first brought him at the beginning of this job. It is St. Philip Neri, and he has confessed here. Now he looks at Our Lady, hands clasped in stone prayer above the arched entrance, looking to the ground as if all our sins are upon her shoulders. He feels his heart slow, and he understands, absolutely, quite how we must all suffer. The waters are grey, the horses high and white out at sea. It is choppy beyond the bar, but Roddy is keen with the ropes and cleats. He's lithe, his movements precise. Nearby, church bells peal and the gulls flap their wings, squawk off, circling high. On the far side of the harbour's hard standing, Staffe sees Pulford skulking in a doorway. He says to the elder, "I need the toilet." "I'll come with you." The toilet block smells the way you'd expect it to, and Staffe goes into a half-door trap, drops his trousers, hoping he can summon what is necessary, all the time scrolling through his phone, creating white noise as he punches in his message to Pulford. "They have Sylvie. Follow man with me till he meets the one with the scar. He killed Reb Stone." He manages to ablute and turns off his phone. When he emerges, he jokes about giving it a few minutes. The elder doesn't laugh, just says, "You are a man of your word." "It's all I have," says Staffe. "So you'll bring the charges against a court, and only him?" "Oh, yes." "And Leonard and Imogen?" "I have given you my word." Staffe leads the way back to London. Howard driving Darius and Arabella in his Bentley, the elder turning off when they get to the bottom of the A2, disappearing back into his secret world. As they drive the empty roads, Staffe works out how he could accomplish a final summoning to justice of the man who killed Rebecca. He laments what the Howards have writ for poor Darius, how quickly he became dispensable, and didn't even know fully why he was called upon to take Elena's life. His bile rises. But they hadn't counted on Rebecca. Hence the elder and the younger, whatever circle they form a part of, digging up what Vasily Chankov had left in his bloody wake. And when Graham Blears turned up, manna from heaven. By the time they get to Ledengate, Staffe has arranged for medics to be on the scene, fearing the worst for Sylvie. He leads Darius into the holding room, suggests that Arabella stay with him. Love is a precious thing, he says to Leonard, regardless of who it is wasted on. Leonard manages a thin-lipped smile. He looks exhausted, as if he might agree to anything. I need a few minutes with Darius, says Staffe. How can I trust you, says Howard. Imogen isn't here, or Roddy. You should call Wakeman. Get him down. Staffe closes the door on him, praying that this is the right thing, and calls Jombo. Call me the moment Sir Ralph Wakeman gets here. He turns his attention to Darius, who is holding Arabella. They touch each other like lovesick teenagers. Sad that they got in so far above their heads. You know, I wasn't going to do it. I thought I could. Kidded myself I could, but when I got there... Do what, Darry? Says Arabella. She fell. She fell against that fucking radiator. Well, she was cut. What could I do? You could have helped her, not suffocated her. And you could have saved Graham Blears. Can you imagine his agonies? You did a terrible thing, Darius. Staffe watches the truth dawn on Arabella, who says, Sir Ralph will make it all right, won't he? Howard comes in, goes to Darius and whispers in his ear. Darius nods, forlorn, broken, says, All I can hope is that I can somehow make amends, and that Arabella and her family don't suffer unduly. What are you saying, Darry? Says Arabella. Darius looks at Howard, who shakes his head. He says nothing more. The younger has Sylvie in the attic. Had to carry her up, fireman style. At one point he thought he might have to show her the back of his hand again, but she went quiet. Must have seen the intent in his eyes. She's curled in a ball under the hip window. The white spirit is poured on her jeans and the sleeves of her jumper, on the floor all around her for good measure. He takes out the matches, sniffs in hard. It clears his sinuses, gives him a rush. Looking at her, he can see the pills have taken effect. She will be dead to the world in a minute. Her eyes lid down, heavy, and he regrets that he has to do this. Equally, he knows that an unenforced threat is its own death sentence. It cannot ever be allowed. These are the terms of engagement. His leg vibrates. He plunges his hand into his pocket, looks at the phone. Seeing it is the elder, his heart gladdens briefly. Perhaps the ether is bringing tidings that there is another way. He hasn't killed often in his life. The first was a bomb-making unionist in the north, tit for tat, and 20 years ago when he wasn't even a man, and just a week before he first met the elder. His heart beats fast. He knows that once she is killed, the inspector will yield, will swallow away everything he knows. "Are you in the ambulance still?" says the elder. "No, I've switched her. We're ready to go." "You mustn't. We have what we want." "What we want?" "Bring her to the station. To Ledengate." "What has changed?" Something inside the younger subsides. A fast life form dies, and he feels a vial of disappointment burst in his belly. He is ashamed of his own reaction, knows he will have to answer for it. "What has he said to you?" "The family is safe. He has what he wants." "What is it that he wants?" The younger's head feels foggy. "What have you given him?" "The murderer. It's all that concerns him." The younger thinks, which murderer? And suddenly feels as if a hand is upon his shoulder, a bead trained on the back of his head. It is as though time has turned and he is once more estranged on the Shankill Road, the day the elder gifted him this life. The elder says, "Put her back in the ambulance and drive it to Ledengate Station. Clean yourself from it and go." "Go where?" "I don't need to know," says the elder. The phone clicks dead. The younger knows there is an opposite reaction to everything you do. The elder makes his way back to his car and promises himself that next Christmas he will look in on his family. His daughter has a newborn baby he has only seen twice. He sighs as he points the key at his car. It jingles and he opens the door, clocking as he gets in the young sergeant in the car across the road. He spotted him as they came out of the Blackwall Tunnel and reconciles himself. He will have to do what he must, whether the sergeant sees him or not. This will mean another spell away. Sir Ralph Wakeman pulls up his chair to talk to Darius à Court. Howard stands against the wall, arms crossed, looking on intently. He scrutinises Darius's every move, seems impressed with the young man. If Staffe didn't know Howard, he might think there is an element of pride in Howard's expression. Staffe says, "He has been read his rights. Do you want to hear it again?" "You have new evidence, I hear," says Sir Ralph. "I will need to see full disclosure by the close of day." The bellboy identified Mr. à Court at the scene. "Anything my client might have said will have to be reconsidered, I'm afraid." Sir Ralph leans forward, lowers his voice, says to Darius, "There will be no more duress." An ember of hope seems to glow in the young man's eyes. Howard goes to Sir Ralph, whispers in his ear. "Ah, I see." The benighted brief turns to Staffe and says knowingly, "Do we have an understanding?" "I have spoken to the CPS. There is a will to bring this case to a speedy conclusion." Howard nods, and when Sir Ralph Wakeman looks back to his client, the hope seems all gone from Darius's eyes. Staffe says to Sir Ralph, "We have almost reached the end of this line." "This line?" Staffe realises he has to rekindle a threat. God knows where Sylvie is. He considers the strength and the weaknesses of his hand. "I don't know how far to pursue this case, Sir Ralph. I have some interesting theories about your client's motives." Howard says, "And what about our agreement?" Wakeman says, "Interesting." "I would like a few minutes with Mr. Howard." You have a proposal," says Wakeman. "Oh, yes. I think you should be there too." Staffe leads Howard outside. "The fresh air will do you no harm," he says. "Imagine being on that boat, all the way to Biscay and beyond. It would be nice if Imogen made it back to the Black Sea." "You gave your word." "I said I'd bring charges. And I said Imogen would be free to go." "You have conditions," says Wakeman. "You deceived me," says Howard. "May I burn in hell for all eternity. Such heinous, bloody sins," says Staffe, his voice trembling. "I would happily send Roddy down for being an accessory, and you might quite easily die in prison if I presented all the conspiracy evidence." He takes a deep breath. "Just like Graham Blears." "Not quite the same," says Wakeman, who is cool, aloof. "Such evidence is thin." "But, as you say, I gave my word," says Staffe. "And you gave me yours. Now where the bloody hell is my fiancée?" he hisses, taking care none of the milling uniforms get wind. "And while we're here, I'll remind you that I won't rest until I have whoever killed Rebecca Stone." In this instant, the doors to the station are battered open, and a pair of community officers, decked out in bicycle helmets and high-vis vests, force their way into reception. "We need some medics," they say. Between them, Sylvie is slumped, her legs dead, feet dragging on the parquet floor. "We found her outside in an unmanned ambulance, would you believe? She's out of it." Jombo steps in, taking a hold of Staffe, whispering in his ear, "You stay out of this. This is too close to home to make a scene." Staffe shrugs Jombo off and walks to Sylvie, wraps his arms around her, holds her tight, says, "You're safe." He presses his face to her head, whispers, "It's over." He can smell petrol, says, "What the hell have they done to you?" Her hair is dank with sweat. She groans. "You lied." Her breath is sticky, and he can smell her insides as she sighs, "Stay away from me." The medics come into reception from the first aid room, and Jombo takes a tight hold of Staffe. "The last thing she needs is more upset. Bide your time, Will. Do you want this all out in the open?" Staffe jabs a finger at Leonard Howard. "You know who killed Rebecca, goddamn you! I want a statement to prove it. If, hypothetically, my client were to do such a thing, the Crown might conceivably pursue Mr. Howard's involvement," says Wakeman. "Unless the perpetrator confessed. The confession would be enough for us," says Staffe. "There were times when men would fall on their swords. Now we are more civilized. But you could imagine such a thing, Leonard," says Staffe, wrestling with how honourable he has been, when you look at what he allowed to happen to Sylvie and Brendan Stone. "This way you are tarnished with a single black sheep. Every family has one. Think about the secrets you can preserve." Sir Ralph whispers to Howard and approaches Staffe, putting an arm around his shoulder, leading him back inside. As they go, Staffe turns to Howard, says, "And there is one final thing I have to ask. A small matter, a private affair." As he tells them, he looks over their shoulders to the holding room where Sylvie was. But she is gone. The elder places the note on the mantel of his young accomplice's fireplace. The handwriting is a perfect copy and will stick in court. He has been at this juncture once before, but was granted a pardon. This time it is simply too grave. When you mess with police, there's a price to pay. Otherwise, the files never close, and this is a file that has to close. He looks out at the young sergeant's parked Mondeo, 3 doors down. He checks the action of his Ruger revolver, a 101 chosen for its double action. You can't be too careful when taking down a pro, especially one of your own. Split seconds might stop the reflexes from killing them, and he blocks out how fond he is of this victim. Still nothing more than a terrace hooligan when they second met, when the young hoodlum saved this soldier's life. Since, he has fashioned that boy into what he is today. He has much to answer for. He checks the chamber for its .357 magnums. With a heavy heart, he returns the cylinder and switches on the TV. The front sitting room flickers. Its glow should deceive the surveilling sergeant for a minute or so. It's all he needs. He slips out the back of John Parnell's rented ground floor apartment and across the gardens, knowing where its tenant, the younger, will be. A final prayer before he fully disappears, if the elder knows his man, which he does. Jombaugh blocks Staffe's path to the first aid room, says she's adamant. Through the grilled window, Staffe can see Sylvie, drowned in thick red blankets, a male nurse on one knee in front of her, administering an injection. She looks up, catches Staffe's eye, and at first it seems she doesn't recognise him. Her hair is greasy, combed back, her eyes Balkan hollow and grey-black. He is appalled with himself, knows he needs to hold her, to tell her he loves her, and that he will never allow such a thing to happen again. He pushes past Jombaugh, who says, "Be careful what you say to her, Will." Staffe pulls open the door, not quite understanding why Jom said what he did. He takes the velvet box from his pocket, removes the emerald pendant, and holds it out. Sylvie shakes her head, and, soft as a distant dove, she says, "It doesn't matter what you say, Will." Suddenly he understands what his sergeant meant. "I'm sorry." "I'm better on my own. I suppose I should thank you for that." She removes the intaglio ring. It seems to take every last drop she has, and the nurses look on as if Staffe is some ogre from fables. He says, "You keep it," holds out the pendant. "I wasn't lying." "We could be at Dad's, and thinking everything was going to be just fine," she says. "But you couldn't. I know that." She smiles at him. "Someone has saved me, Will. And it's you." Boxing Day. Staffe runs the castle now, as far as the track to the river, then downstream along the right bank to Putney Bridge. There are no ducks on the Thames. Perhaps it is a family day. Working his way through the harbour development, he thinks of all the profit being made up in Aldersworth, and what that can and can't buy. He touches the paper he is carrying, tucks down the back of his tracksuit bottoms, damp from sweat. Still worth the same, though. On the embankment, Parliament behind him now, he sees St. Paul's and the smaller burnished domes of the Thamesbank Hotel. Gary Mulplant will be far, far away, his young wings clipped. Staffe hopes the other young man, Darius Accourt, might have been visited by his mother. He hopes she will never be made to understand her part in his downfall. He focuses on the Thamesbank's burnished domes, like something you would see across the Bosphorus. And he sees that beautiful and young woman, pale as death, on the moonlit floor of that hotel room. He never spoke to her, can never understand the depths of her ambition, her unexpressed desires. Elena and Bobo will be flown home. Arabella will be getting lines on her fair face by the time Darius emerges from his sentence. In the city, he puts in 100-stride sprint along Cheapside, collapses through Leadengate's doors and into Johnbore's reception. Panting, he asks for Pennington. Johnbore nods, and Staffe climbs the stairs. Pennington is looking out on a part of his domain. Says, "You finally put it to bed, Staffe." "Just the one loose end, sir," he says, sitting down, rubbing his quadriceps. Pennington spins on his chair, raises his eyebrows at Staffe's sporting attire. "What loose end?" "The bastard who killed Rebecca. We will have to see if that confession materializes. You know how these people can go to ground." "These people," says Pennington. "I guess there are things we will never understand. Do you ever think that there are other worlds running alongside us? We don't see them or hear them. We can't touch them. We can smell them, sir." Pennington opens the drawer to his desk and takes out an envelope, lobs it to Staffe. "Pulford brought it in. I read it. Felt I had to in the circumstances, but I'm showing it you now." The envelope is addressed to D.I. Wagstaff, Leadengate Police Station. Inside, the letter is short and written in an ugly, thin hand. "I, John Parnell, acting of my own volition and being of utterly sound mind, confess the lives of Rebecca Stone and myself. She was executed for violations against society, and I undertook to kill her independently. My reasons go to my grave. Both killings are absolutely a matter of honour, in ways neither you nor the legal system can understand. May God forgive me, and you, and all of us. John Parnell, 25th of December, 2009. You say Pulford brought the letter. It was in Parnell's flat. Pulford followed the other one there, but lost him. The body was found in the garden of St. Philip Neri just before midday." "Ironic," says Staffe. "Suicide is a sin." "He was shot in the head. There were no prints at all on the gun. He wasn't wearing gloves." "An execution," says Staffe. "Can this be the end of it?" "Not quite," says Staffe, standing. "But don't worry, just one final, private matter, sir. I heard about Sylvie. I'm sorry, Will. You said you might take a holiday. Where might you go?" Staffe remembers Stanislav, driving for the port and the vast continent beyond. Sometimes his world seems so small. "Another country," he says, leaving. "You never call," says Rosa, standing aside, welcoming Staffe in. In the lounge, baby Elena bangs her toy pram into furniture. She spits bubbles, and her chubby cheeks are impossibly rosy. On his knees, wiggling a doll at her and making her chortle, is the man from the photograph with the Italianate village behind him. "This is Mike," says Rosa. Staffe looks for Mike's wedding finger, sees it is bare. He gives the man the benefit of the doubt and a handshake, his warmest smile. "You look terrible, Will," says Rosa. And true enough, he feels terribly weak, utterly eroded by this case. He puts his hand out behind him, sits back heavily on the sofa. Rosa hands him a glass of water, and he sips from it. Hears the infant Elena gibbering nonsense. He pushed too hard, for a woman he didn't even know, and now he is bereft. Staffe forces down the water, hands the glass back to Rosa. I can't stop. I'm going away, but I've got something for you. For Elena, really. He hands her the envelope marked Privat. Watch as Rosa's mouth drop open as she sees the bonds. She needs someone to look after her, to be with her all the time, at least until she goes to school. It belongs to whoever holds it. It was Rebecca's, and now it's yours. Hold it for Elena. It's a matter of honour. Willing Flesh by Adam Creed. Read by Jonathan Oliver.
We do hope you've enjoyed listening to this Oak Hill audiobook. If you'd like to listen to further titles, please contact your local library or write to us at the address on the box cover.